The great stasis crypts of Solemnace stood silent for millions of years, their occupants locked in dreamless slumber while the galaxy underwent countless transformations. Unlike many Necron tomb worlds that suffered catastrophic failures during the Great Sleep, Solemnace remained largely intact, its systems maintaining optimal function throughout the eons of dormancy. It was within these perfectly preserved halls that Trazyn, soon to become known as the Infinite, first stirred back to consciousness. Trazyn's awakening differed from the typical Necron experience, where most Necrons emerged from stasis with their minds fragmented and memories scattered. Trazyn retained an unusual clarity of purpose and identity. The exact date of his awakening remains unclear in Imperial records, but evidence suggests it occurred well before the widespread Necron reemergence that began in the late 41st millennium. This early awakening afforded him considerable advantages, allowing him to establish his collection and power base while most of his kind still slumbered. As Overlord of Solemnace, Trazyn held absolute authority over his tomb world. The Nihilak dynasty, to which he belonged, was known for its isolationist tendencies and obsession with preserving cultural artifacts even before biotransference. These traits found their ultimate expression in Trazyn, though his methods would eventually diverge significantly from dynasty norms. Traditional Nihilak protocol emphasized the preservation of Necronter relics specifically, while Trazyn's interests expanded far beyond such limited parameters to encompass all of galactic history. The Nihilak dynasty itself occupied a middle tier among the Necron power structures. Not as influential as the Sautek or as ancient as the Zarekin, the Nihilak nevertheless controlled significant territories and maintained a reputation for technological sophistication and cultural refinement. Their dynastic symbol, a sunburst surrounding a central scarab, adorned Trazyn's personal heraldry, though he rarely emphasized his dynastic affiliations when it suited his purposes to operate independently. What truly set Trazyn apart from his peers was his relationship to the biotransference process, the traumatic transformation that converted the mortal Necronter into the soulless Necrons. This process, orchestrated by the Katan known as the Deceiver, stripped most Necronter of their personalities, emotions, and in many cases, their sanity. The higher a Necronter's status, the more of their original personality they retained, yet even lords and overlords suffered significant degradation of their former selves. Trazyn, however, emerged from biotransference with his personality not merely intact, but arguably enhanced. His pre-transference identity as a chronicler and scholar became amplified into an obsessive drive to collect and preserve. Inquisitorial theorists speculate that Trazyn may have undergone a specially modified version of the biotransference process, or perhaps his particular psychological makeup rendered him uniquely resistant to the personality-stripping effects. Whatever the cause, the result was a Necron who retained not only his memories and intellect, but also a distinct sense of humor, curiosity, and aesthetic appreciation, qualities almost entirely absent in the majority of his kind. This exceptional mental preservation allowed Trazyn to maintain a perspective on history that spanned both his living existence as a Necronter and his undying continuation as a Necron. While most Necron lords viewed the galaxy through the lens of conquest or revenge against the ancient Old Ones, Trazyn saw it as a vast repository of historical curiosities waiting to be cataloged and preserved. This outlook would define his actions for millennia to come. The earliest days after Trazyn's awakening were spent securing Solemnace and assessing the state of his tomb world. Unlike many Necron lords who immediately sought to rebuild their military might, Trazyn's first priority was the establishment of suitable gallery spaces. The labyrinthine corridors of Solemnace were gradually transformed into a sprawling museum complex, with specialized stasis chambers designed to preserve specimens in their original condition indefinitely. Solemnace itself existed far from major trade routes or strategically valuable systems, a deliberate choice that afforded Trazyn privacy for his collecting activities. The tomb world's location in the galactic northeast, relatively distant from the most densely populated Imperial sectors, allowed him to operate with minimal interference during the early millennia of his collection efforts. The planet's surface remained barren and inhospitable, a desolate wasteland of metallic dunes and crystalline formations, while beneath the surface, a vast network of galleries expanded year by year. Trazyn's initial collection focused primarily on Necron artifacts, gathering items that had survived the war in heaven and the Great Sleep. These formed the nucleus of what would become his most prized exhibition, the Pre-Biotransference Gallery. Here he preserved rare examples of Necron art, technology, and cultural items that predated their transformation into the soulless Necrons. Many of these artifacts were unique in the galaxy, the last remnants of a civilization otherwise entirely erased from existence. As his confidence grew, Trazyn began venturing beyond Solemnace, initially targeting nearby star systems, where he could test his acquisition methods without drawing undue attention. These early expeditions were characterized by caution and precision, rather than the audacious heists for which he would later become infamous. Primitive Xeno civilizations that had arisen during the Great Sleep made particularly vulnerable targets, with entire cultural cross-sections disappearing overnight to reappear in Trazyn's growing galleries. The technological systems that would become Trazyn's hallmarks developed during this period. His mastery of dimensional tesseract labyrinths, pocket dimensions capable of storing vast collections in minimal physical space, evolved from relatively simple stasis fields to the complex extra-dimensional vaults that would eventually house millions of exhibits. Similarly, his trademark empathic obliterator weapon was refined through numerous field tests, its ability to destroy targets based on their shared identity proving particularly useful for capturing unique specimens while eliminating their protectors. The organization of Solemnace reflected Trazyn's methodical mind. He arranged his galleries chronologically and thematically, with specialized wings dedicated to particular species, historical periods, or technological developments. A significant portion of the early museum was devoted to the war in heaven, featuring captured Old One technology, preserved Quark specimens, and even fragments of Catan. These exhibits were particularly valuable as they represented the only comprehensive record of that ancient conflict from the Necron perspective. Trazyn's approach to his subordinates also diverged from typical Necron practice. Where most overlords maintained strict hierarchical control through command protocols, Trazyn granted unusual autonomy to his closest advisors and lieutenants. This was less out of generosity than pragmatism. His frequent absences on collecting expeditions necessitated capable management of Solemnace in his absence. These trusted lieutenants, including figures like Sanit and Oltix, were selected for their reliability and lack of ambition rather than battlefield prowess. The defensive systems of Solemnace developed in parallel with its museum functions. Recognizing that his growing collection would eventually attract unwanted attention, Trazyn implemented multiple layers of security. The outer defenses included conventional Necron technology, automated tomb spiders, sentinel pylons, and scarab swarms, while the inner sanctums featured more exotic protections. Particularly ingenious were the recursive dimensional traps that caused intruders to cycle through the same chambers repeatedly without ever reaching their objectives, and the living exhibits that could be activated as guardians in emergency situations. As the millennia passed, Trazyn's ambitions expanded beyond mere preservation to active intervention in historical events. He began to recognize patterns in galactic history that suggested certain moments held particular significance, nexus points where multiple historical threads converged. These became his priority targets for collection, leading him to develop techniques for capturing not just objects or individuals, but entire scenes frozen at the moment of their historical importance. The first major test of this approach came when Trazyn targeted the remnants of a human civilization that had flourished during the Dark Age of technology. This advanced human colony had preserved functioning SDC systems and AI constructs long after such technologies had been lost to the wider Imperium. Rather than simply taking individual artifacts, Trazyn captured the entire central complex along with its inhabitants, preserving them in stasis at the exact moment of his arrival. This exhibit became one of the centerpieces of his human ascendancy wing, demonstrating a technological peak that even the Imperium of the 41st millennium could not match. Such ambitious acquisition projects required substantial resources, leading Trazyn to develop his network of informants and agents throughout the galaxy. Unlike other Necron lords who relied exclusively on their own kind, Trazyn recognized the value of employing members of other species as unwitting or sometimes willing accomplices. Through a combination of technological manipulation, deception, and occasional genuine patronage, he established information networks that kept him apprised of potential additions to his collection. The relationship between Trazyn and other Necron dynasties during this early period was complex and often strained. His tendency to acquire artifacts and technology from fellow Necron tomb worlds earned him significant enmity, particularly from the Sodek dynasty, whose territories he raided multiple times. The Nihilak dynasty's leadership maintained formal ties with him, but kept him at arm's length, recognizing both his usefulness and the potential embarrassment his activities could cause. Trazyn leveraged this ambiguous status to operate in the spaces between dynastic territories, answerable to no authority but his own obsessive drive to collect. Perhaps the most significant early addition to Trazyn's collection was his acquisition of the celestial orrery from a minor Necron tomb world. This planet-sized stellar map allowed real-time observation of every star in the galaxy, and theoretically, the power to extinguish them at will. While most Necron lords would have weaponized such a device immediately, Trazyn recognized its greater value as a navigational tool and historical record. The orrery became his primary means of identifying historical events worth preserving, allowing him to observe disturbances in the warp and real space that signaled moments of particular importance. By the time the first Imperial explorers began encountering active Necron tomb worlds in the late 41st millennium, Trazyn had already established Solemnace as the preeminent historical repository in the galaxy. His collection spanned billions of years, from pre-war in heaven artifacts to contemporary specimens. More importantly, he had refined his methods and philosophy, developing the distinctive approach that would make him one of the most recognizable and feared Necron lords despite his relative lack of territorial ambition. The transformation of Solemnace from a standard tomb world to a museum realm represented a fundamental shift in purpose that mirrored Trazyn's own evolution. Where other Necrons awakened with thoughts of reconquest and restoration of their ancient empire, Trazyn emerged with a historian's perspective, seeing the galaxy not as a prize to be won, but as a vast, ever-changing exhibition whose most significant moments deserved preservation. This philosophical divergence would define his interactions with both his fellow Necrons and the younger races of the galaxy for millennia to come. Beneath the metallic dunes of Solemnace lies a labyrinth of impossible scale and complexity. The galleries of Trazyn's museum extend far beyond conventional three-dimensional space, utilizing Tesseract technology to fold reality upon itself. A visitor, should one ever receive an invitation rather than becoming an exhibit, might walk for standard years without encountering the same display twice, despite the physical impossibility of such a space existing within a single planet. The organizational structure of Solemnace follows both chronological and thematic principles, with major wings dedicated to specific epochs of galactic history. The oldest sections house pre-biotransference Necronter artifacts in environmentally sealed chambers that replicate the harsh radiation conditions of their original homeworld. Here, visitors can observe everyday items used by the ancient Necronter medical devices designed to prolong their naturally short lifespans, radiation-resistant clothing, and primitive but elegant astronomical instruments used to track and ultimately curse the stars that poison their world. Adjacent to these personal artifacts stands the Hall of Ascendancy, chronicling the rise of the Necronter Empire before their fateful encounter with the Khatan. Architectural models display the evolution of their tomb cities, while military dioramas showcase the wars of unification that ultimately brought their species under singular rule. Most striking is a complete replica of the first faster-than-light Necronter vessel, preserved in a stasis field that allows viewers to observe its internal mechanisms. technology that, while primitive by later standards, represented a crucial breakthrough for their civilization's expansion beyond their home system. The War in Heaven Gallery occupies a vast central chamber where the ceiling appears to extend infinitely upward, displaying a real-time holographic recreation of the galaxy as it existed 60 million years ago. Here, Trazyn has assembled an unparalleled collection of Old One artifacts, items of such advanced biological psychic engineering that even after millions of years, some still pulse with residual power. Glass cases contain preserved specimens of the various warrior species created by the Old Ones, including Proto-Eldar, Krork ancestors of modern orcs, and several completely extinct races whose names have been forgotten by all save Trazyn himself. Perhaps most controversial among Necron visitors is the Biotransference Memorial, a sprawling exhibit documenting the process that transformed the Necronter into the Necrons. Actual biotransference chambers salvaged from the original conversion facilities stand in silent testimony, their internal mechanisms still stained with the residue of millions of Necronter bodies. Alongside these machines are rare specimens of unconverted Necronter preserved at the moment of transformation, their expressions frozen in a mixture of religious ecstasy and dawning horror as they realized the true nature of the immortality they had been promised. The post-biotransference era occupies multiple interconnected galleries, documenting the rebellion against the Khatan and the subsequent Great Sleep. Here, Trazyn has assembled fragments of shattered Khatan, minute shards kept in specialized containment fields that prevent them from communicating with each other or influencing their surroundings. Each shard is labeled with the name of its parent entity and the battle in which it was captured, forming a comprehensive catalog of the Necrons' betrayal of their former masters. Moving forward in galactic history, Solemnace contains extensive exhibits dedicated to the rise and fall of the Eldar Empire. The Eldari Wing features artifacts spanning millions of years, from the earliest post-war in Heaven settlements to relics recovered from the final decadent days before the fall. Particularly noteworthy is Trazyn's collection of spirit stones, thousands of them arranged in a spiral pattern that, when viewed from above, forms a perfect replica of the Eldar rune for hubris. Each stone contains the consciousness of an actual Eldar, trapped in a state of suspended animation rather than absorbed into their intended infinity circuit, a fact that has made this exhibit the target of countless Eldar retrieval attempts over the millennia. The human galleries of Solemnace present the most comprehensive record of mankind's technological evolution in existence, beginning with pre-spaceflight artifacts from Terra itself, including what appears to be a perfectly preserved 20th century automobile. The exhibits progress through the dark age of technology, the age of strife, and into the Imperial era. Unlike Imperial historical records, which are fragmented and often deliberately falsified, Trazyn's collection presents an unfiltered view of human development, including numerous examples of technologies purged from Imperial records as heretical. The centerpiece of the human wing is undoubtedly the Dark Age of Technology section, featuring functional standard template construct systems, men of iron with their original programming intact, and examples of human genetic engineering that far surpass anything the Imperium's Adeptus Mechanicus can currently produce. These items are not merely displayed, but maintained in working order, periodically activated under controlled conditions to ensure their continued functionality, a practice that would be considered tech heresy of the highest order by Imperial authorities. More recent human history is represented in the form of dioramas capturing pivotal moments from the Horus Heresy, the Age of Apostasy, and various significant Imperial campaigns. These displays differ from conventional exhibits in that they contain actual participants from these events, frozen in stasis at the exact moment of their historical significance. A tableau of the drop site massacre on Istvan V, for example, features genuine space marines from both Loyalist and Traitor legions, their bolter fire suspended mid-air, expressions of betrayal and triumph perfectly preserved on their faces. The technological systems that enable these displays represent the pinnacle of Necron dimensional engineering. At the heart of Solemnace lies a master tesseract labyrinth, a hyperdimensional matrix that connects to thousands of pocket dimensions, each containing a portion of Trazyn's collection. This system allows him to store a virtually unlimited number of exhibits in a physically impossible space, while maintaining perfect environmental conditions for each item regardless of its original habitat or preservation requirements. The Tesseract technology functions by folding higher dimensional space into configurations that conventional three-dimensional beings cannot perceive. When Trazyn wishes to access a particular exhibit, the Tesseract system reconfigures itself, bringing the desired pocket dimension into alignment with the primary gallery space. To an observer, it would appear that rooms simply materialize or vanish, replaced by entirely different chambers with no apparent transition. This technology also serves as a security measure, as unauthorized visitors find themselves navigating an ever-shifting labyrinth where destinations remain perpetually out of reach. The preservation methods employed within these Tesseract dimensions vary according to the nature of the exhibit. Inanimate objects are typically maintained in conventional stasis fields that halt all molecular degradation. Living specimens, however, require more sophisticated chronometric suspension. This technology doesn't merely freeze time for the subject. It actually creates a closed temporal loop, continuously resetting the specimen to its original state. The result is perfect preservation that can be maintained indefinitely without cellular degradation or entropy. For particularly delicate biological specimens, Trazyn employs phase crystallization, a process that converts organic material into a crystalline structure while maintaining its original atomic configuration. The resulting crystal appears identical to the original specimen, but possesses virtually infinite stability. When required for study or display, these crystallized specimens can be temporarily reverted to their original state through application of a specialized dephasing field. The security systems protecting these priceless collections are appropriately formidable. The outermost layer consists of conventional Necron defenses, scarab swarms, immortals, and Lichguard that patrol the surface and upper levels of Solemnace. More interesting are the specialized canoptech constructs unique to Trazyn's tomb world, designed specifically for museum security rather than warfare. Canoptech archivists resemble conventional wraiths, but possess additional sensory apparatus capable of detecting the slightest environmental changes that might damage exhibits. They continuously monitor temperature, humidity, radiation levels, and even subtle dimensional fluctuations that could indicate a breach in the Tesseract system. When anomalies are detected, they can implement immediate countermeasures ranging from environmental adjustments to complete dimensional isolation of threatened gallery sections. Canoptech Curators represent a more combat-oriented security force, resembling spiders but equipped with specialized weaponry designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. Their primary armament consists of stasis projectors that can immediately freeze intruders in temporal suspension, preserving them for Trazyn's judgment, which typically results in the unfortunate individual becoming a permanent addition to the appropriate exhibit. Perhaps most insidious are the mind-shackle scarabs that infest every gallery. These microscopic constructs remain dormant until triggered by unauthorized presence, at which point they swarm into the intruder's nervous system and override their motor functions. Unlike standard mind-shackle scarabs used by other Necron forces, Trazyn's variants are programmed with detailed knowledge of proper museum etiquette. Affected intruders find themselves compelled to behave as model visitors, walking only on designated paths, maintaining appropriate distance from exhibits, and even reading information plaques with exaggerated interest before being led to a special exhibition that invariably turns out to be a processing chamber where they join the collection permanently. The most valuable and dangerous exhibits receive additional protection in the form of dimensional locks, specialized devices that partially remove the exhibit from conventional spacetime. An item under dimensional lock exists simultaneously in normal space and in a pocket dimension accessible only to Trazyn himself. Any attempt to move or damage the exhibit affects only its partial projection in real space, while the actual item remains perfectly secure in its extra-dimensional vault. For living exhibits maintained in stasis, Trazyn employs recursive consciousness loops, a technology that traps the subject's mind in an endlessly repeating sequence of thoughts. From the perspective of the imprisoned individual, only moments have passed regardless of how many millennia they have spent in Trazyn's collection. This prevents the psychological deterioration that would otherwise result from extended periods of conscious immobility, ensuring that specimens remain in their original mental state when eventually reactivated for study or display. The temporal museums represent Trazyn's most ambitious application of chronometric technology. Unlike conventional exhibits that preserve a single moment, these galleries capture entire time streams, short loops of reality that continuously cycle through a significant historical event. Visitors can observe the same battle, negotiation, or ceremony repeating endlessly, with each iteration identical down to the subatomic level. The energy requirements for maintaining these temporal loops are enormous, necessitating dedicated power systems that draw directly from Solemnace's central dynastic core. Among the most notable temporal museums is the Tyrant encounter chamber, which continuously replays the first documented meeting between Imperial forces and a Tyrant vanguard organism. The loop encompasses approximately 17 minutes of real time, during which visitors can observe the progressive realization among the Imperial personnel that they are dealing with something entirely outside their experience. The exhibit terminates moments before the vanguard organism would have attacked, resetting to the beginning of the encounter in a perfect temporal cycle. The grand galleries of Solemnace house countless treasures, but the methods by which Trazyn acquires his specimens are as remarkable as the collection itself. Unlike conventional museum curators who purchase or excavate artifacts, Trazyn's acquisition strategy more closely resembles that of a master thief, combining meticulous planning with audacious execution. His heists have targeted some of the most heavily guarded locations in the galaxy, earning him the enmity of virtually every major power in the 41st millennium. The theft of the Bell of St. Gerstal stands as one of Trazyn's most infamous acquisitions from Imperial space. This ancient relic, said to toll only in times of the Imperium's greatest need, was housed in an armored basilica on the shrine world of Solemnace Prime. According to Imperial ecclesiastical records, the bell was cast from the melted-down armor of St. Gerstal himself, a legendary figure who had fought alongside the Primarchs during the Great Crusade. Prophetic texts suggested that when the Imperium faced its darkest hour, the bell would toll 13 times, heralding Gerstal's return to lead mankind to victory. Trazyn's interest in the bell stemmed not from its supposed prophetic properties, but from its historical significance as one of the few authentic artifacts dating to the early Imperium. His acquisition plan unfolded with characteristic precision during the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension in the 897th year of the 41st millennium, when pilgrims from across the sector crowded the shrine world. Utilizing a series of quantum displacement orbs strategically planted throughout the basilica complex, Trazyn created localized phase shifts that temporarily removed sections of the security cordon from real space. As bewildered Adeptus Arbites and Sisters of Battle found themselves suddenly transported to empty chambers with no connection to their original positions, Trazyn and a hand-picked team of Lichguard moved unimpeded through the basilica's innermost sanctums. The bell itself was protected by a stasis field and numerous psychic wards, but these proved ineffective against Necron phase technology. Within 23 minutes of initiating the operation, Trazyn had extracted the bell, its supporting structure, and 3 unfortunate priests who happened to be conducting maintenance at the time. The Imperial response was as swift as it was ineffective. By the time a full company of Ultramarines arrived to secure the site, Trazyn had already transported the bell to Solemnace via inertialess drive. It now occupies a prominent position in his Imperial Faith Gallery, occasionally tolling of its own accord despite the stasis field surrounding it, a phenomenon that Trazyn finds both scientifically fascinating and aesthetically pleasing. More technically challenging was Trazyn's acquisition of a perfect clone of Primarch Fulgrim from the laboratories of Fabius Bile. The renegade apothecary had spent centuries attempting to recreate the Primarchs through a combination of genetic manipulation and warp-infused cloning techniques. Most of his experiments resulted in malformed abominations, but in the case of Fulgrim, Bile had achieved something remarkable, a clone physically identical to the pre-demonic Primarch, possessing the original's memories and personality, but none of the corruption that had transformed the true Fulgrim into a servant of Slaanesh. Trazyn's interest was piqued when his network of informants reported Bile's success. A pristine specimen of the Emperor's genetic craftsmanship represented an acquisition of unprecedented historical value. The difficulty lay not merely in the theft itself, but in ensuring the clone remained intact during transport, a challenge given the complex psycho-spiritual nature of Primarch physiology. The opportunity presented itself during the Synchron Revolt, when Bile's attention was diverted by an uprising among his experimental subjects. Trazyn's force materialized directly within Bile's inner sanctum, utilizing a dimensional inversion sphere to bypass the conventional defenses. The clone of Fulgrim, suspended in a nutrient bath and still unconscious, was quickly secured in a specialized stasis chronometer, calibrated specifically for its unique biology. Bile's counterattack came swifter than anticipated. The apothecary had installed numerous homunculi throughout his laboratory complex, and these artificial beings converged on Trazyn's position with unnatural speed. What followed was a fighting retreat through corridors filled with biochemical traps and mutated guardians. Trazyn lost 17 Lichguard and was forced to utilize 3 of his backup bodies before reaching the extraction point. The Fulgrim clone now resides in a specialized display chamber on Solemnace, maintained in a state of suspended animation. The exhibit includes detailed genetic schematics extracted from the clone's cellular structure, providing what may be the only complete record of Primarch physiology outside the Emperor's own laboratories. Trazyn occasionally reactivates the clone under controlled conditions to document its psychological patterns, finding particular interest in comparing its behavioral responses to historical accounts of the original Fulgrim. Bile's subsequent attempts to reclaim his creation have all failed, though not for lack of trying. On 3 separate occasions, the apothecary has dispatched forces to infiltrate Solemnace, each time employing more exotic biological weapons than the last. Trazyn has preserved specimens from each of these incursion forces, adding them to his Evolution of Chaos exhibit with meticulously labeled genetic deviations. The Eldari artifacts in Trazyn's collection represent some of his most contested acquisitions. The Eldari, with their psychic sensitivity and ancient knowledge, recognize the cultural significance of their relics in ways most species cannot. They also possess the technological sophistication to track these items across vast distances, making them particularly persistent in their recovery attempts. Among Trazyn's most prized Eldari possessions is a complete set of spirit stones from the final council of Lilithanir, the last Eldari settlement to fall before the birth of Slaanesh. These spirit stones contain the conscious essences of the council members who, in their final moments, were debating whether to abandon their hedonistic practices, a debate rendered tragically moot by the Chaos God's violent birth. The historical significance of these particular spirit stones lies in their preservation of the final thoughts of Eldari, who recognized their civilization's impending doom, but could not avert it. The acquisition of these spirit stones required Trazyn to infiltrate a Craftworld's infinity circuit, a feat considered impossible by most Necron cryptechs. Using a phase harmonic disruptor tuned specifically to the psychic frequency of Eldari soul technology, Trazyn created a temporary blind spot in the infinity circuit's awareness. This allowed him to extract the specific spirit stones without triggering the Craftworld's defensive systems. By the time the Eldari realized what had happened, Trazyn had already transported the stones to a specialized containment chamber on Solemnace designed to block their psychic emanations. Equally significant is Trazyn's collection of exodite relics, particularly those from the lost maiden world of Silvashar. The exodites, those Eldari who fled their decadent society before its fall to establish agrarian colonies on distant worlds, maintained traditions and technologies that predated the corruption of Eldari society. Trazyn's Exodite Gallery includes a world spirit nexus, the psychic heart of an Exodite ecosystem, preserved at the moment of the world's destruction by Imperial forces. This exhibit not only documents Exodite technology, but also preserves the unique psychic imprint of an entire biosphere, with all its interconnected life forms and spiritual energies frozen in perfect stasis. The most controversial of Trazyn's Eldari acquisitions remains the Vault of Hidden Ages, allegedly stolen from deep within the Black Library itself. The vault contains historical texts dating to the earliest days of the Eldari Empire, including first-hand accounts of the war in Heaven written by Eldari who fought alongside the Old Ones against the Necronter. These texts directly contradict many aspects of Necron historical records, particularly regarding the nature of the Khatan and the true origins of the Eldari species. Trazyn maintains these contradictory accounts side by side in his museum, apparently finding the historical discrepancies more interesting than any single authoritative version of events. Perhaps the most scientifically significant specimen in Trazyn's entire collection is the last surviving Krork, captured during an expedition to the ruins of an ancient space hulk drifting near the galactic core. The Krork were the original warrior species created by the Old Ones to combat the Necronter during the war in Heaven, the direct ancestors of modern orcs, but vastly more advanced in both biology and technology. Where modern orcs are brutish and technologically regressive, the Krork were sophisticated bioweapons with innate knowledge of advanced physics and military strategy. The preserved Krork specimen in Trazyn's collection stands over 4 meters tall, encased in powered armor that rivals modern Astartes equipment in its sophistication. Its cellular structure displays the same fungal characteristics as contemporary orcs, but with a level of complexity that indicates a much higher degree of bioengineering. Most remarkable is the neural structure of the specimen's brain, which contains engineered memory strands that appear to encode detailed technical knowledge and military tactics. Acquiring this specimen required Trazyn to navigate a space hulk composed of technology spanning millions of years, from ancient Eldari vessels to Dark Age human ships. At the core of this temporal labyrinth, he discovered a stasis chamber of Old One design, still functioning after 60 million years. Within it was the Krork specimen, apparently placed there by the Old Ones themselves as a safeguard against some forgotten contingency. The extraction operation triggered numerous automated defense systems of both Old One and Eldari origin, resulting in the loss of dozens of Necron warriors and forcing Trazyn to employ his dimensional inversion sphere to escape with the specimen. The Krork now resides in a specialized biological containment gallery, surrounded by comparative specimens showing the evolutionary path from Krork to modern orc. Trazyn periodically revives small portions of the Krork's brain tissue for analysis, carefully documenting the encoded knowledge before returning the specimen to stasis. His notes indicate particular interest in the psychic engineering that allows Krork to instinctively form complex social hierarchies and technological systems, abilities that persist in degraded form among modern orcs but lack the sophistication of the original design. The scientific value of this specimen cannot be overstated. It represents the only intact example of the Old One's most advanced bioengineering, providing insights into both the war in Heaven and the true capabilities of the Krork at the height of their development. Several Ordo Xenos Inquisitors have attempted to negotiate for access to this specimen, offering various relics in exchange, but Trazyn has consistently refused, partly due to the specimen's irreplaceable nature, and partly because he enjoys possessing knowledge that the Imperium desperately wants but cannot obtain. The Empathic Obliterator stands as perhaps the most distinctive weapon in Trazyn's considerable arsenal, a masterpiece of Necron engineering that perfectly embodies its wielder's methodical yet theatrical approach to combat. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, the staff appears at first glance to be a traditional Necron command rod, its shaft composed of living metal that constantly shifts and realigns at a microscopic level. Closer examination reveals intricate circuitry etched into every surface, forming complex geometric patterns that serve both decorative and functional purposes. The weapon's most distinctive feature is its headpiece, a spherical energy matrix contained within an ornate frame of overlapping crescents. This matrix pulses with sickly green energy that occasionally coalesces into shapes resembling screaming faces before dissolving back into formless energy. These manifestations are not merely aesthetic, but represent the psychic impressions of previous victims, their final moments of agony preserved within the weapon's memory engrams. The Obliterator functions on principles fundamentally different from conventional Necron weaponry. While standard Gauss weapons disintegrate their targets by breaking molecular bonds, the empathic Obliterator operates on a quantum sympathetic frequency that links targets sharing common characteristics. When the weapon strikes a victim, it establishes a quantum entanglement between that individual and all others of similar nature within a radius of approximately 100 meters. The initial victim serves as a conduit, with their death agony amplified and transmitted through this quantum link to all connected targets. The defining parameter of this sympathetic link, what constitutes a similar nature, can be adjusted by the wielder. Trazyn typically calibrates the weapon to target specific military units or species, allowing him to eliminate entire squads with a single strike while leaving valuable specimens unharmed. The quantum entanglement is sophisticated enough to distinguish between subtle variations. It can, for example, target only space marines of a specific chapter while leaving other Astartes unaffected. The pain amplification circuit represents the most technically sophisticated component of the Obliterator. This subsystem captures the neurological patterns of the initial victim at the moment of death, converting this information into a quantum template that is then forced upon all linked targets. The result is not merely death, but a perfectly synchronized experience of the original victim's final moments, replicated with perfect fidelity across dozens or even hundreds of individuals simultaneously. Magos biologist Heron Svek, who witnessed the weapon's effects during the scouring of Gathlammer, described the result as a cascade of synchronized death, each victim's face locked in identical expressions of horror, their bodies contorting in perfect unison as though participating in some macabre ballet. Svek's subsequent dissection of the victims revealed that even their internal organs had failed in precisely the same sequence, despite variations in their physical condition before the attack. The power source for this extraordinary weapon remains a subject of debate among Imperial tech adepts. Analysis of energy signatures recorded during its activation suggests the Obliterator draws power directly from a localized pocket dimension, possibly linked to Solemnace's central energy grid. This would explain the weapon's seemingly unlimited operational capacity, as it effectively bypasses the constraints of conventional power cells by tapping into the vast energy reserves of Trazyn's tomb world regardless of physical distance. Complementing the empathic Obliterator in Trazyn's personal arsenal is a modified Gauss blaster of unique design. Unlike the standard issue weapons carried by Necron immortals, Trazyn's blaster features additional focusing, arrays that allow for precision targeting at extreme ranges. The molecular disruption beam can be narrowed to affect areas as small as a single square centimeter, enabling Trazyn to disable specific components of enemy equipment or sever particular neural pathways without causing broader damage. This surgical precision proves particularly valuable during acquisition operations, where Trazyn seeks to incapacitate rather than destroy potential specimens. During the raid on Sakhalim's reliquary, for instance, Trazyn used his modified blaster to systematically disable the joint servos of 15 Adeptus Custodes, while leaving their armor and bodies otherwise intact. The immobilized warriors were subsequently added to his Imperial Defenders gallery, their golden armor still gleaming and unmarred by conventional weapon damage. The blaster incorporates a secondary fire mode that produces a wide-spectrum electromagnetic pulse capable of temporarily disabling electronic systems. This function proves particularly effective against mechanized opponents such as Imperial vehicles or Tau battlesuits, allowing Trazyn to neutralize threats without risking damage to potentially valuable technology. The pulse can be calibrated to affect only specific frequencies, enabling selective targeting of particular systems while leaving others functional, a level of control impossible with standard Necron weaponry. Perhaps most intriguing is the integration of phase technology into the blaster's targeting system. A miniaturized phase shifter allows the weapon's beam to bypass certain types of physical barriers, including some energy shields and armor compositions. This technology, normally reserved for dedicated phasing devices, has been miniaturized and incorporated into the weapon's firing mechanism through engineering techniques that would be impossible for even the most skilled Imperial artificers to replicate. The third component of Trazyn's standard combat loadout is a set of dimensional shackles, devices resembling ornate manacles connected by a chain of energy rather than physical links. These devices function as portable containment units, capable of isolating a target within a localized pocket dimension where time passes at an infinitesimal fraction of its normal rate. From the perspective of the imprisoned subject, their capture and subsequent millennia in Trazyn's collection might span only moments of subjective experience. The dimensional shackles operate on principles similar to Necron phase shifters, but with a critical difference. Rather than shifting the target partially out of conventional spacetime, they create a self-contained dimensional bubble that exists adjacent to but separate from normal reality. This bubble can be manipulated, transported, and eventually integrated into Solemnace's larger tesseract labyrinth without disrupting the stasis effect, maintaining the specimen. What truly sets Trazyn apart from other Necron lords, however, is not his weaponry, but his mastery of mind transference protocols. While all Necron nobility possess some version of this capability, allowing their consciousness to animate new bodies when their current form is destroyed, Trazyn has refined this process to an unprecedented degree of efficiency and sophistication. Standard Necron resurrection protocols require specialized reanimation crypts that reconstruct damaged bodies or fabricate new ones when necessary. This process typically occurs over several hours and requires the Necron to be in proximity to tomb world infrastructure. Trazyn, by contrast, has developed a system of distributed consciousness that allows near instantaneous transfer to pre-positioned bodies located throughout the galaxy. The technical foundation of this system lies in quantum-entangled memory crystals implanted in each of Trazyn's backup bodies. These crystals maintain constant subspace communication with his active consciousness, creating real-time backups of his mental state that can be activated the moment his current form is compromised. The transfer occurs at superluminal speeds through a dedicated quantum network that bypasses conventional limitations of distance and time. Trazyn maintains hundreds of these backup bodies in hidden stasis chambers scattered across numerous worlds. Each is identical in appearance, but may contain specialized modifications suited to particular environments or combat situations. Some feature enhanced phase shifters for infiltration operations, while others incorporate reinforced living metal alloys for direct combat. All share the distinctive appearance that has become Trazyn's trademark: the ornate headdress, the slightly stooped posture suggesting academic curiosity, and the gleaming emerald eyes that convey an unsettling intelligence. The most remarkable aspect of Trazyn's mind transference system is its ability to preserve perfect continuity of consciousness during the transfer process. Unlike other Necrons, who often experience momentary disorientation or memory fragmentation when reanimating, Trazyn's awareness flows seamlessly from one body to the next without interruption. This continuity allows him to execute complex tactical maneuvers that leverage his own death as a strategic element, deliberately sacrificing one body to position another for maximum advantage. During the Battle of Karnak, Imperial forces witnessed this capability firsthand when Trazyn apparently died 7 times in the same engagement, each death followed by the immediate appearance of an identical figure attacking from an unexpected direction. The psychological impact on the Imperial troops was devastating, with several squads breaking formation to fire indiscriminately at any Necron resembling Trazyn, exactly the chaotic response he had intended to create. Beyond his personal arsenal, Trazyn frequently deploys rare and exotic weapons drawn from his vast collection. Unlike many collectors who merely display their treasures, Trazyn maintains most technological artifacts in working condition and does not hesitate to employ them when circumstances warrant. This practice has exposed Imperial forces to weapons technologies spanning millions of years of galactic history, often with devastating consequences. During the Penitent Crusade in the Antilles sector, Trazyn deployed a complete squad of functional men of iron, autonomous combat robots from humanity's dark age of technology that had been preserved in his collection for millennia. These machines, operating on original programming untainted by the corruptions that led to their destruction during the Age of Strife, demonstrated combat capabilities that outmatched even veteran Space Marine tactical squads. Their integrated weapon systems utilized principles of gravitational manipulation that allowed them to bypass conventional armor entirely, directly affecting the mass of targeted objects. Similarly, during incursions into Eldari territory, Trazyn has been observed using weapons of Old One design, biologically integrated devices that respond to psychic commands despite his lack of conventional psychic ability. These weapons, preserved from the war in heaven, operate on principles that blend technology with organic components in ways that even the Eldari find disturbing. Particularly notable are the chronometric accelerators that selectively advance the target's temporal experience, causing them to age thousands of years in seconds, while surrounding space remains unaffected. Perhaps most controversial among Trazyn's deployed collection pieces are the Katan-infused weapons occasionally observed in the hands of his elite Lich Guard. These devices contain minuscule fragments of shattered Katan, their godlike powers bound and channeled through Necron control circuits. Such weapons violate the ancient Necron protocols established after the rebellion against the Katan, which mandate that all Star God fragments be contained and isolated rather than utilized. Trazyn's willingness to ignore these protocols for the sake of tactical advantage has earned him censure from more traditional Necron dynasties, particularly the Zarakan, who maintain the strictest adherence to anti-Katan measures. The technological sophistication of Trazyn's arsenal extends beyond weapons to include numerous defensive systems integrated into his personal form. His living metal body incorporates advanced regenerative protocols that can repair damage at rates exceeding standard Necron capabilities. Microscopic scarab-like constructs inhabit his frame, continuously monitoring for structural weaknesses and implementing repairs without conscious direction. This system allows Trazyn to recover from damage that would force other Necrons into emergency phase-out, maintaining battlefield presence even under sustained attack. A secondary defensive system takes the form of a localized chronometric field generator mounted within Trazyn's chest cavity. This device creates microscopic temporal distortions around incoming projectiles, slightly adjusting their position in time-space to cause near misses rather than direct hits. The effect is subtle enough to appear as extraordinary luck or uncanny reflexes rather than obvious technological intervention, leading many opponents to underestimate the difficulty of landing a solid blow. The 13th Black Crusade represented a pivotal moment in galactic history, a convergence of forces that would forever alter the Imperium's fate. For Trazyn the Infinite, it presented an opportunity too significant to merely observe from the galleries of Solemnace. As Abaddon's forces gathered in unprecedented numbers at the edge of the Eye of Terror, Trazyn's monitoring systems detected disturbances in the fabric of reality that suggested this conflict would transcend ordinary warfare. Trazyn's involvement began months before the first Chaos ships breached Imperial space. Through his celestial orrery, a planet-sized stellar map that represented every star in the galaxy with perfect accuracy, he observed disturbing patterns forming around the Cadian Gate. The orrery, housed in a specially constructed chamber deep within Solemnace, allowed Trazyn to monitor galactic events with unparalleled precision. Unlike most Necron lords who viewed the orrery primarily as a weapon capable of extinguishing stars, Trazyn valued it as the ultimate observational tool, perfect for identifying historically significant events as they unfolded. The patterns emerging around Cadia showed unmistakable signs of warp-real space convergence on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. Swirling eddies of probability coalesced around the fortress world, indicating its central role in coming events. More concerning were the faint lines of force connecting these disturbances to ancient Necron structures buried beneath Cadia's surface, pylons created during the war in heaven to stabilize the boundaries between dimensions. Recognizing the historical significance of what was about to unfold, Trazyn made an unprecedented decision. Rather than merely collecting artifacts after the conflict, he would participate directly, ensuring both the preservation of key specimens and potentially influencing the course of events. This marked a significant evolution in his collecting methodology, from passive acquisition to active intervention in historically pivotal moments. Trazyn's arrival on Cadia occurred during the confusion of the initial Chaos assault. Materializing within the command bunker of Kasser Kraf, he introduced himself to the startled Imperial defenders with characteristic theatrical flair. General Creed, commander of the Cadian defense, found himself face to face with a Xenos entity claiming to offer assistance against the forces of chaos. The decision to accept this help, while technically heretical, reflected the desperate circumstances facing the Imperial forces. What the Imperial command did not initially realize was that Trazyn's interest extended beyond the immediate conflict to the ancient Necron pylons scattered across Cadia's surface. These monolithic structures, predating human settlement of the planet by millions of years, formed part of a vast network designed to stabilize the boundary between real space and the immaterium. Over millennia, many had fallen into disrepair or been damaged by human construction, weakening the network's effectiveness. Trazyn's knowledge of these pylons far exceeded anything available to Imperial scholars. He understood not merely their purpose, but their operational mechanics, including the complex harmonic frequencies required to activate their full capabilities. This knowledge became crucial as the battle for Cadia intensified, and the fabric of reality itself began to strain under the pressure of Abaddon's sorcerous assaults. Working alongside Archmago's Dominus Belisarius Call, Trazyn established a temporary alliance that bridged the ancient enmity between Necron and Mechanicus. Their collaboration focused on reactivating and synchronizing the pylon network to reinforce the dimensional boundaries around Cadia. Call, despite his initial suspicion, recognized the value of Trazyn's technical expertise regarding the ancient structures. Their combined efforts represented one of the most unusual technological collaborations in Imperial history. The relationship between Trazyn and Call developed into one of grudging professional respect. Both were collectors of knowledge in their own way, though their methodologies differed dramatically. Where Trazyn preserved historical artifacts in unchanging stasis, Call actively modified and built upon ancient technologies. Their discussions during brief respites from battle ranged from theoretical debates about the nature of the immaterium to practical applications of dimensional stabilization technology. Trazyn found Call's perspective fascinating, a rare example of human innovation that approached Necron sophistication, if along entirely different technological pathways. As the battle for Cadia reached its critical phase, Trazyn deployed his most significant contribution to the Imperial defense. Specimens from his collection temporarily awakened to serve as combat units. This prismatic array, as Imperial forces came to call it, represented an unprecedented display of Trazyn's collecting activities over thousands of years. From specialized stasis vaults, he released precisely selected historical warriors into the conflict, each group deployed at tactical locations where their specific capabilities would prove most effective. The first such deployment occurred at the Elysian Fields, where Chaos forces had overwhelmed the Imperial defensive line. Without warning, a perfect formation of Ultramarines in ancient Mark IV armor materialized among the faltering Imperial troops. These were not contemporary Space Marines, but preserved specimens from the Great Crusade era, their armor bearing honorifics and campaign markings not seen for 10,000 years. They fought with the disciplined precision of the 30th Millennium Legion's Astartes, executing combat doctrines long since modified or abandoned by their modern counterparts. Similar deployments followed across the battlefield. A squad of Juran dragoons, elite cavalry from a regiment disbanded in the 32nd millennium, appeared to reinforce the northern flank, their distinctive azure carapace armor and fléchette carbines cutting through chaos cultist hordes with methodical efficiency. At the Martyrs' Rampart, Imperial defenders witnessed the arrival of 5 custodian guards in ancient ceremonial armor, their fighting style noticeably different from modern custodes, yet no less lethal. Perhaps most shocking to Imperial observers was the deployment of a small contingent of Eldari Rangers alongside human defenders at a critical supply depot. These Xenos warriors, preserved from a forgotten conflict millennia past, fought with the precision and coordination that characterizes their kind. Their presence caused considerable confusion among Imperial forces until it became clear they were targeting only chaos entities, their ancient weapons proving particularly effective against demonic manifestations. Each of these exhibits operated under Trazyn's direct control through sophisticated command protocols integrated into their stasis systems. They retained their original combat capabilities and tactical acumen, but followed Trazyn's strategic directives without question. When their tactical objective was achieved or their position became untenable, they simply vanished, returned to stasis within Trazyn's dimensional vaults with their physical condition reset to precisely the state in which they had been deployed. The deployment of these historical warriors served multiple purposes beyond the immediate tactical advantage they provided. For Trazyn, it represented an opportunity to observe his specimens in their natural combat environment, validating the accuracy of his preservation techniques. It also allowed him to document their interactions with contemporary forces, creating new exhibits that captured the meeting of warriors separated by thousands of years of history. While his collection fought across Cadia's surface, Trazyn focused his personal attention on the pylon network. Working with Call and a select group of Mechanicus adepts, he supervised the reactivation of key nodes in the ancient system. The process required precise calibration of each pylon's quantum harmonics, a task made more difficult by the ongoing battle and the accumulated damage of millennia. As each node activated, the local warp interference diminished noticeably, forcing demonic entities to retreat and weakening the psychic abilities of chaos forces. The network's activation reached its climax at the primary control node beneath the plains of Tyrant. Here, Trazyn revealed knowledge that had been lost since before humanity's evolution, the master frequency that synchronized all pylons planet-wide. As this harmonic pattern propagated through the network, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The storm of warp energy surrounding Cadia calmed, the boundaries between dimensions reinforced by technologies designed specifically for this purpose during the ancient war against the Old Ones. For a brief moment, it appeared the combined efforts of Imperium and Necron might succeed in repelling the 13th Black Crusade. The pylon network, fully activated for the first time in millions of years, created a zone of dimensional stability that negated many of Chaos's most significant advantages. Warp-based communications and transportation became unreliable within the Cadian system, stranding portions of Abaddon's fleet and preventing the arrival of reinforcements. Abaddon, recognizing the existential threat posed by the activated pylons, executed his contingency plan. The remains of the Blackstone fortress known as the Will of Eternity, damaged in earlier fighting, were directed into a collision course with Cadia's surface. This massive impact, combined with the planet's already stressed geological structure, initiated a catastrophic chain reaction. The planetary crust began to fracture, disrupting the carefully calibrated pylon network and negating its stabilizing effect. As Cadia began to break apart, Trazyn faced a collector's dilemma: which pieces of this historically significant event could be preserved before everything was lost? His primary focus turned to the pylons themselves, particularly the central control node with its irreplaceable ancient technology. Using dimensional extraction devices, he removed several complete pylons and transported them directly to specialized storage facilities on Solemnace, preserving not just the physical structures, but their operational state at the moment of acquisition. His secondary priority, involved collecting specimens from the conflict itself. During the frantic evacuation of Imperial forces, Trazyn moved methodically through key battle sites, selecting representatives of various units for his collection. These included examples of the newly deployed Primaris Space Marines, whose enhanced physiology represented a significant evolutionary step in Astartes' development. Trazyn acquired several of these specimens in different states of activity, one in the midst of combat, another during medical treatment, and a third in discussion with regular Astartes, capturing the full context of their introduction to the battlefield. Other acquisitions from the falling Cadia included a complete Shadow Sword Super heavy tank with its crew frozen at the moment of firing its volcano cannon, a traitor marine possessed by a Lord of Change mid-transformation, and a group of Cadian officers around a tactical display showing the final defense plans. Each was extracted with surgical precision using localized stasis fields that preserved not just the subjects, but their immediate environment, creating self-contained dioramas of the conflict's most significant moments. Perhaps Trazyn's most valuable acquisition from Cadia was informational rather than physical. During his work with the Pylon network, he gained access to Belisarius Call's data tether, allowing him to copy substantial portions of the Archmagos' research database. This information included preliminary schematics for the Primaris Space Marines, fragmentary data on Call's attempts to improve upon the Emperor's original designs, and technical analyses of various Chaos artifacts encountered during the campaign. This data was transmitted directly to Solemnace's central cogitation engines for integration into Trazyn's comprehensive historical archives. As Cadia's final collapse became inevitable, Trazyn withdrew to his ship in orbit, continuing to document the planet's destruction from a safe distance. The formation of the Great Rift, a warp storm of unprecedented scale that split the galaxy in two, represented a historical event of such magnitude that no single perspective could capture its full significance. Trazyn deployed automated observation devices across multiple systems to record the phenomenon from different angles, creating what would become one of the most comprehensive records of this galaxy-changing moment. In the aftermath of Cadia's fall, Trazyn returned to Solemnace to organize and catalog his new acquisitions. The specimens and data collected during the 13th Black Crusade formed the core of a new wing dedicated to this pivotal conflict. Central to this exhibition was a scale model of Cadia showing the Pylon network in its activated state, surrounded by dioramas capturing key moments from the battle. Visitors to this gallery could observe the complex interplay of forces that led to the planet's destruction and the subsequent birth of the Great Rift. The Cadian campaign marked a significant evolution in Trazyn's collecting methodology. Where previously he had primarily acquired specimens after historical events had concluded, his direct intervention in the conflict allowed him to shape the very history he sought to preserve. This more active approach would influence his subsequent collecting activities, particularly as the galaxy entered the turbulent era of the Indomitus Crusade. Among Trazyn's most disquieting technologies is his sophisticated mind capture apparatus, a system that preserves not merely the physical form of his specimens, but their complete consciousness, memories, and personality matrices. Unlike crude Imperial mind scanning devices that create imperfect copies of thought patterns, Trazyn's technology captures the entirety of a subject's mental state with perfect fidelity, allowing him to activate and interact with their consciousness at will while their physical form remains in stasis. The technological foundation of this system lies in quantum-entangled neural lattices, microscopic crystalline structures that map precisely to organic neural pathways. When applied to a subject, these lattices create a real-time duplicate of their cognitive functions, recording not just current thoughts but the complete architecture of memory, personality, and instinctive responses. The process is non-destructive, leaving the original mind intact while creating a perfect functional copy that can be stored, transferred, or activated independently of the physical brain. The capture process itself is remarkably swift, typically requiring less than 3 seconds of direct contact between Trazyn's specialized apparatus and the subject. During this brief window, the neural lattice establishes quantum connections with every synapse and neural pathway in the target's brain, creating a comprehensive map that updates continuously until the connection is severed. This map is then transferred to a storage crystal, a hyperdimensional matrix capable of maintaining the complete neural state in perfect suspension indefinitely. What distinguishes Trazyn's mind capture technology from similar systems employed by other advanced species is its perfect preservation of subjective experience. When a captured consciousness is reactivated, it experiences no temporal discontinuity. From their perspective, only moments have passed since their capture, regardless of how many millennia they have spent in Trazyn's collection. This continuity of experience allows Trazyn to conduct conversations with historical figures exactly as they were at the moment of their acquisition, with no degradation of personality or memory. The applications of this technology extend far beyond mere preservation. Trazyn frequently activates captured minds for scholarly discussions, historical clarification, or simply entertainment. His personal quarters in Solemnace include a specialized projection chamber where these consciousnesses can be temporarily housed in holographic bodies, allowing face-to-face interactions with specimens spanning millions of years of galactic history. Imperial scholars would be horrified to learn that Trazyn regularly conducts philosophical debates between ancient Terran philosophers, pre-fall Eldari seers, and even preserved minds from the dark age of technology. The ethical implications of this technology are profound. From the perspective of the captured consciousness, their existence continues uninterrupted, though under Trazyn's complete control. They retain all memories, emotional responses, and personality traits, experiencing their situation with full awareness. Some adapt to their circumstances, engaging with Trazyn as an intellectual equal and taking advantage of the opportunity to observe history unfold across millennia during their periodic activations. Others remain hostile, attempting to resist or escape despite the futility of such efforts. Trazyn finds both responses equally fascinating as subjects of study. Among the most significant minds in Trazyn's collection is Archmagos Violic, a senior tech priest from the early days of the Mechanicum, who participated in the development of the first Titan war machines. Captured during an expedition to Mars in the 28th millennium, Violic's consciousness provides Trazyn with unparalleled insight into early Imperial technology. During their periodic conversations, Violic has gradually accepted his situation, recognizing the opportunity to observe technological evolution across millennia. His technical knowledge has proven invaluable to Trazyn's understanding of human innovation, particularly regarding the principles underlying Titan construction and operation. More resistant to his circumstances is Lord General Xarius, a celebrated Imperial commander captured during the Gothic War. Unlike Violic, Xarius refuses to accept his situation, attempting to escape during each activation despite the impossibility of a consciousness separating from its housing matrix. Trazyn maintains detailed records of these escape attempts, noting how Xarius's strategies evolve with each activation as he learns more about his circumstances. The Lord General's tactical acumen makes these attempts more sophisticated than most, providing Trazyn with an ongoing study in human adaptability and military thinking. Perhaps the most valuable military mind in Trazyn's collection belongs to Eldari Autarch Calorax, captured during the final days of the Craftworld Kind's lament before its destruction. Calorax's consciousness contains comprehensive knowledge of Eldari military doctrines spanning thousands of years, including tactics developed specifically to counter Necron forces. Trazyn activates this consciousness sparingly and under strict containment protocols, aware that even without a physical form, an Eldari mind of such sophistication remains dangerous. Their conversations focus primarily on historical clarification, with Trazyn seeking to resolve discrepancies between Necron and Eldari accounts of ancient conflicts. The oldest human consciousness in Trazyn's collection dates to the Dark Age of technology, a scientist named Elian Varus, who participated in the development of early warp drive technology. Varus's mind provides a direct window into humanity's technological golden age, untainted by the superstition and technological regression of the later Imperium. During activations, Varus expresses horror at the Imperium's approach to technology, particularly the Mechanicus's ritualistic practices. His technical knowledge remains so advanced that Trazyn restricts records of their conversations to his most secure data vaults, recognizing that even fragmentary information from this period could significantly alter the balance of power in the current galaxy if released. Not all preserved minds in Trazyn's collection belong to notable historical figures. He maintains an extensive archive of ordinary consciousnesses from various species and historical periods, selected to represent typical members of their society. These provide valuable context for understanding larger historical trends, allowing Trazyn to examine how average individuals experienced major galactic events. This collection includes Imperial citizens from different worlds and social strata, Tau from each caste, Aeldari from various craft worlds, and even orcs representing different clan structures. The technical sophistication required to maintain these thousands of preserved minds is considerable. Each consciousness resides in its own crystal matrix, stored within a specialized vault that maintains perfect quantum coherence. The activation system allows Trazyn to select specific minds or groups of minds for temporary revival, either in isolation or in controlled groups that can interact with each other. This capability enables him to stage historical debates or recreate social dynamics from specific periods, creating living dioramas of intellectual history to complement his physical exhibits. Closely related to Trazyn's mind capture technology is his mastery of body jumping techniques, methods for transferring his own consciousness between different physical forms with perfect continuity. While all Necron Lords possess some version of this capability, allowing their consciousness to animate new bodies when their current form is destroyed, Trazyn has refined this process to an unprecedented degree of sophistication and tactical utility. The foundation of Trazyn's body jumping capability lies in distributed quantum entanglement. Unlike standard Necron consciousness transfer, which requires proximity to specialized reanimation facilities, Trazyn maintains constant quantum links to hundreds of backup bodies scattered throughout the galaxy. These links transmit his complete neural state in real time, ensuring that each potential host body contains an up-to-date copy of his consciousness ready for instant activation. These backup bodies are stored in specialized stasis chambers concealed on various worlds, often hidden beneath existing structures or in dimensionally folded spaces that exist adjacent to normal reality. Each chamber contains multiple bodies, all identical in appearance, but often specialized for different environments or combat situations. Some feature enhanced phase shifters for infiltration operations, while others incorporate reinforced living metal alloys for direct combat. All share Trazyn's distinctive appearance, including his ornate headdress and the staff housing that serves as mounting point for his empathic obliterator. The transfer process itself occurs at superluminal speeds through a dedicated quantum network that bypasses conventional limitations of distance and time. When Trazyn's current body sustains critical damage, his consciousness automatically transfers to the nearest available backup, activating it with no perceptible interruption in his awareness. From his perspective, the transition feels instantaneous. One moment he is in his damaged body, the next he is observing the same scene from a different position as his new form activates. This capability provides significant tactical advantages in combat situations. During the Battle of Karnak, Imperial forces reported destroying Trazyn 7 times, only to have him reappear elsewhere on the battlefield within seconds. Each death was followed by the immediate activation of a new body attacking from an unexpected direction, creating confusion and psychological stress among enemy forces. Veteran commanders who have faced Trazyn multiple times have learned to anticipate this capability, deploying specialized null field generators that temporarily disrupt the quantum entanglement network in a localized area, briefly preventing his consciousness transfer within that zone. The most sophisticated application of this technology occurred during Trazyn's infiltration of the invaders' Space Marine Chapter Fortress Monastery. After his initial body was discovered and destroyed by Terminator guards, Trazyn's consciousness transferred to a backup body hidden in the monastery's lower levels months earlier. This body, specifically modified with enhanced stealth capabilities, allowed him to continue his mission from a different approach vector, while the Space Marines believed they had successfully eliminated the threat. By the time they realized their error, Trazyn had already secured his target, a pre-heresy banner carried by the chapter's founders, and escaped the facility. The limitations of this body-jumping capability are primarily resource-based rather than technical. Each backup body requires significant materials and energy to construct, particularly the specialized neural lattices that enable seamless consciousness transfer. Additionally, the maintenance of the quantum entanglement network demands continuous power from Solemnace's central energy grid. Trazyn therefore deploys his backup bodies strategically, concentrating them in regions where he plans active collection operations, while maintaining a smaller reserve in other sectors for opportunistic acquisition. The consciousness transfer technology that enables Trazyn's body jumping also serves as the foundation for perhaps his most disturbing capability, the ability to temporarily override the minds of other Necrons, imposing his consciousness over theirs while preserving their physical capabilities. This technique, which Trazyn calls borrowing, but others might more accurately term possession, allows him to directly control other Necrons in his vicinity, effectively turning them into extensions of himself during critical operations. The process requires physical proximity and works most effectively on Necrons of lower status, whose consciousness lacks the complexity and willpower to resist effectively. When Trazyn initiates the override, his neural patterns temporarily supplant the targets, giving him complete control over their body while his original form remains operational. From the perspective of observers, the affected Necron's posture and movements subtly shift to match Trazyn's characteristic mannerisms, though their physical appearance remains unchanged. This capability proved particularly valuable during the Synchron heist, where Trazyn simultaneously controlled 12 immortals, coordinating their actions with perfect precision to bypass a series of timed security measures. Each controlled Necron performed a specific task at exactly the right moment, creating a synchronized operation that would have been impossible to coordinate through conventional commands. When several immortals were destroyed by unexpected defenses, Trazyn simply transferred his control to nearby replacements without losing operational continuity. The ethical implications of this practice among Necrons remains ambiguous. Lower-tier Necrons with minimal remaining personality may experience no subjective harm from temporary override, while higher-status Necrons with more intact identities might perceive the experience as a violation. Trazyn shows little concern for such distinctions, viewing all available Necrons as potential tools for his collection activities regardless of their individual status or remaining personality. Complementing these consciousness manipulation technologies is Trazyn's mastery of mindshackle scarabs, microscopic mechanical constructs that can infiltrate organic nervous systems and override natural control functions. While many Necron lords employ some version of this technology, Trazyn's variants are uniquely sophisticated, capable of preserving the victim's consciousness as an observer while controlling their physical actions with perfect precision. The relationship between Trazyn the Infinite and Oricon, the Diviner, stands as one of the most complex and enduring rivalries in Necron history. Their conflict spans millennia, characterized not by outright warfare, but by a persistent game of intellectual one-upmanship, temporal manipulation, and occasional theft. Where Trazyn collects physical artifacts and specimens, Oricon hoards knowledge of future events, using his mastery of chronomancy to navigate the timestream with unparalleled precision. Their fundamental philosophical disagreement centers on whether the past or the future represents the more valuable domain of study. The origins of their rivalry date back to the early days following biotransference. While most Necrons focused on military conquest or technological development, Trazyn and Orokin both recognized the value of information, albeit different types. Their first documented confrontation occurred during the initial phase of the Great Sleep, when Orokin detected Trazyn's attempt to preserve a complete record of pre-sleep Necron society. The Astromancer viewed this as interference with the natural flow of time, arguing that some elements of their civilization were meant to be forgotten. Trazyn's response was characteristic of his sardonic approach. He stole Orokin's personal chronoscepter, a device the Astromancer had spent centuries calibrating to his specific temporal signature. The theft itself was less significant than its timing, occurring precisely when Orokin was conducting a delicate calculation regarding the optimal awakening period for the Necron race. The resulting miscalculation caused Orokin's personal tomb to activate several centuries earlier than intended, forcing him to observe events he had specifically arranged to miss. Their confrontations intensified following the general awakening of the Necron dynasties. During the Synchron campaign, Trazyn and Orokin found themselves pursuing the same objective, a pre-biotransference data crystal containing technical specifications for original Necronter star drives. Orokin sought the crystal to verify his calculations regarding a future stellar alignment, while Trazyn simply wanted to add it to his technological collection. Their forces clashed among the ruins of an ancient Necronter outpost, neither willing to yield. The conflict escalated when Orokin employed his signature ability, temporarily ascending to a higher energy state that granted him near Khatan levels of power. In this empowered form, Orokin could manipulate local time fields with devastating effect, aging Trazyn's warriors to dust or reversing their personal time streams to before they had been activated. Trazyn countered by deploying chronomantic artifacts from his own collection, including a temporal displacement orb that scattered fragments of Orokin across multiple points in the timeline. The battle ended in stalemate when both realized the data crystal had been damaged during their conflict, with each blaming the other for its partial destruction. The incident established a pattern that would characterize their future interactions: mutual pursuit of the same objective, escalating temporal manipulations, and ultimately shared frustration, as their efforts often resulted in the loss or damage of the very prize they sought. What makes their rivalry particularly distinctive is its non-lethal nature. Despite possessing the means to permanently destroy each other, neither has ever attempted to do so. For Trazyn, Orokin represents a unique specimen, possibly the only being in the galaxy whose temporal manipulations rival his own collection in historical significance. The Astromancer's ability to witness and sometimes influence future events provides a perspective that even Trazyn's comprehensive archives cannot match. Similarly, Orokin recognizes that Trazyn's collection preserves aspects of history that would otherwise be lost to time, information that occasionally proves valuable to his own prognostications. Their most significant temporal conflict centered on the Akhityar dynasty's ancestral crown, an artifact that predated biotransference and carried complex encryption codes that could potentially override command protocols in Necrons from multiple dynasties. Orokin had foreseen that the crown would play a critical role in a future conflict and attempted to secure it before that predetermined point. Trazyn, meanwhile, had identified the crown's historical significance and sought to add it to his pre-biotransference gallery. What followed was a chronomantic duel of unprecedented complexity. Orokin used his predictive abilities to anticipate Trazyn's movements, positioning forces at locations the collector would target before he arrived. Trazyn countered by deliberately creating temporal paradoxes, sending duplicate bodies along multiple timeline branches simultaneously, making his true intentions impossible to predict. The conflict spilled across 3 star systems and 7 distinct time periods as each attempted to outmaneuver the other. The situation reached its peak when both Necron lords arrived at the crown's location simultaneously, Trazyn by conventional means and Orokin by temporarily shifting himself back through time. Their direct confrontation resulted in a localized time storm that trapped both in a recursive temporal loop for for what subjectively felt like centuries, but objectively lasted only moments. When the loop finally collapsed, they discovered the crown had been taken by a third party, a Deathwatch kill team that had exploited their mutual distraction to secure the artifact for study by the Ordo Xenos. The aftermath of this incident led to one of their rare instances of cooperation. Recognizing their shared interest in recovering the crown before Imperial authorities could fully analyze it, they temporarily combined resources. Trazyn provided specialized containment technology that could neutralize the psychic wards protecting the inquisitorial stronghold, while Orokin calculated the precise moment when security would be at its weakest. Their joint operation successfully recovered the crown, after which they immediately resumed their rivalry, each claiming possession through increasingly elaborate temporal arguments. In stark contrast to his intellectual sparring with Orokin stands Trazyn's more conventional adversarial relationship with Imodic the Stormlord, Pharaon of the Sodek dynasty. Where Orokin and Trazyn engage in battles of wit and temporal manipulation, Trazyn's interactions with Imodic involve more traditional conflicts over territory, authority, and dynastic honor. As the most powerful Necron ruler in the galaxy, commanding the largest awakened dynasty, Imodic represents the conventional Necron approach to power, military might, territorial expansion, and strict hierarchical control. Trazyn's first significant provocation of Imodic occurred when he acquired the Staff of the Destroyer from the Sotek dynasty's ancestral vaults. This artifact, a symbol of the Pharaon's authority dating back to pre-biotransference times, disappeared during a ceremonial display marking Imodic's ascension to full control of the dynasty. In its place, Trazyn left a hololithic projection showing the staff being added to his collection, along with a note complimenting its craftsmanship and historical significance. Imodic's response was swift and characteristic of his methodical military approach. Rather than pursuing Trazyn directly, he systematically attacked 3 worlds known to house Trazyn's hidden stasis vaults, destroying each completely. The message was clear: continue to interfere with Sodek holdings, and Solemnace itself might face similar treatment. This represented one of the few occasions when Trazyn faced a threat he could not simply dismiss or outmaneuver through his usual methods. The situation escalated when Trazyn infiltrated Imodic's flagship during the Stormlord's campaign against the Tau Empire. While Imodic was occupied directing a complex pincer movement against a Tau fleet, Trazyn accessed the vessel's historical archives, copying technical specifications for Sodek variant Tesla weaponry. Upon discovering the intrusion, Imodic personally confronted Trazyn on the command deck, resulting in a brief but intense duel that ended with Trazyn's apparent destruction. This victory proved hollow when Imodic later discovered that the Trazyn he had destroyed was merely one of many backup bodies, and that during their confrontation, the real collector had been elsewhere on the ship, acquiring additional artifacts from Imodic's personal collection. The incident damaged Imodic's reputation for infallible security and further soured relations between the 2 Necron lords. Their most significant conflict occurred over the Sanctuary 101 excavation. This site, where Necrons had famously first encountered the Adeptosaururitas, became a point of contention when both claimed authority over the archaeological operation. Imodic asserted territorial rights based on the site's location within Sodek expansion zones, while Trazyn claimed historical precedence as the first to recognize the battle's significance. The resulting dispute nearly escalated into full dynastic conflict before the intervention of a Tyranid splinter fleet forced both parties to temporarily abandon the site. Despite these conflicts, a complex respect exists between the two. Imodic recognizes Trazyn's unparalleled knowledge of Necron history and occasionally consults him on matters relating to ancient technology or pre-biotransference protocols. Trazyn, meanwhile, acknowledges Imodic's military genius and has surreptitiously observed several of the Stormlord's campaigns, preserving key moments for his collection. Their relationship represents the tension between different visions of Necron resurgence, Imodic's conventional empire building versus Trazyn's preservation of history across all species. Beyond the Necron dynasties, Trazyn has developed a peculiar relationship with the Blood Raven's Space Marine chapter. These Adeptus Astartes, notorious throughout the Imperium for their acquisition of artifacts and relics from various sources, share Trazyn's collecting tendencies, albeit with different motivations. Where Trazyn collects for historical preservation, the Blood Ravens gather weapons and equipment to strengthen their chapter's capabilities. Their first documented encounter occurred during the Cronus campaign, where Blood Raven's forces discovered a previously unknown Necron tomb complex. As the Space Marines systematically explored the site, they encountered increasingly sophisticated security measures, specifically designed to capture rather than kill intruders. Several squads disappeared entirely, only to be discovered later in stasis fields, perfectly preserved as specimens of early 41st Millennium Adeptus Astartes tactical deployment. The chapter's response was to send librarian Jonah Orion, whose psychic abilities allowed him to detect the subtle dimensional distortions that preceded Trazyn's appearance. When Trazyn finally revealed himself to claim a particularly well-preserved squad, he found himself facing a prepared adversary. The resulting confrontation ended inconclusively when Orion used his powers to temporarily disrupt Trazyn's phase shifter, forcing the Necron to retreat without his intended specimens. Rather than discouraging Trazyn, this resistance only increased his interest in the chapter. He began researching their history, discovering their unusual practice of collecting artifacts from other chapters and Imperial organizations. This shared collecting tendency created what Trazyn described in his archives as a refreshing symmetry, two collecting entities circling each other with similar methods but opposing purposes. Subsequent encounters between Trazyn and the Blood Ravens have followed a consistent pattern. The Space Marines secure a significant historical artifact, often from Xeno's ruins or forgotten human settlements. As they prepare to transport their find to the chapter fortress, Trazyn appears with overwhelming force, intending to claim both the artifact and the Space Marines themselves. The Blood Ravens, now familiar with his methods, employ increasingly sophisticated countermeasures, occasionally succeeding in protecting their prize, but more often losing it to the superior technology at Trazyn's disposal. This ongoing contest has developed into something approaching mutual respect. Trazyn has been heard to remark that the Blood Ravens represent the most interesting collectors among the younger races, while chapter records describe Trazyn as a persistent adversary whose technological capabilities warrant extreme caution. Neither side acknowledges the ironic similarity in their methods. The Blood Ravens' habit of liberating relics from other Imperial organizations mirrors Trazyn's own acquisition techniques to a remarkable degree. The aftermath of the World Engine's destruction sent ripples through Necron dynasties across the galaxy. Though Trazyn himself was not present at the battle that saw the Astral Knights chapter sacrifice themselves to destroy the planet-sized superweapon, his arrival in the debris field came with characteristic swiftness. Within hours of the World Engine's destruction, Trazyn's specialized collection vessels materialized among the scattered fragments of what had once been one of the most formidable weapons in the Necron arsenal. The World Engine, properly named Borsis by its masters in the Nephrec dynasty, represented the pinnacle of Necron stellar manipulation technology. Unlike conventional tomb worlds, the World Engine had been designed specifically as a mobile fortress capable of planetary destruction on an unprecedented scale. Its outer shell contained thousands of reality phasing generators that created an impenetrable shield, while its core housed a stellar manipulator capable of inducing artificial supernovas in nearby stars. Trazyn's interest in the World Engine went beyond mere technological curiosity. The superweapon represented a direct link to the war in heaven, having been constructed during the final phase of that ancient conflict as part of the Necron's campaign against the Old Ones. Its systems contained original programming from that era, unmodified by the millions of years of dormancy that had corrupted many other Necron constructs. For a historian of Trazyn's sensibilities, the opportunity to examine such pristine technology was irresistible. His collection fleet deployed specialized recovery drones designed to identify and secure key components amid the debris field. These drones, resembling metallic scarabs the size of Imperial shuttles, used quantum scanning technology to detect specific energy signatures associated with the world engine's most valuable systems. They focused particularly on the command core, where the controlling intelligence of the superweapon had been housed, and the phase generators that had powered its impenetrable shields. The recovery operation faced unexpected competition. The Nephrek dynasty, original masters of the world engine, had dispatched their own salvage forces to recover what remained of their prized weapon. Led by Overlord Zondrek, these forces arrived to find Trazyn's drones already harvesting choice components from the debris field. The resulting confrontation was brief but intense, with both sides employing phase technology to seize contested fragments simultaneously. Trazyn himself remained aboard his flagship during this initial confrontation, directing operations through quantum-entangled command protocols. When Zondrek demanded direct communication, Trazyn responded with characteristic diplomacy tinged with mockery. He proposed a division of the salvage, offering to leave structural components and basic weapon systems to the Nephrek while claiming the central control systems and phase generators for his historical preservation efforts. Zondrek, a Necron lord known for his peculiar delusion that he was still fighting the ancient wars against the Necronter's original enemies, rejected this proposal outright. In his damaged mind, Trazyn appeared as an ancient rival general attempting to claim battlefield trophies before proper accounting could be taken. His response was to launch a direct assault on Trazyn's collection vessels, deploying specialized tomb blades modified for void combat. The ensuing battle among the debris fragments demonstrated Trazyn's tactical flexibility. Rather than engaging in conventional ship-to-ship combat, he activated several preserved specimens from his collection. Specifically, a squad of Void adapted Astartes Terminators from the extinct Star Wolves chapter. These warriors, temporarily released from stasis and controlled through sophisticated command protocols, deployed directly into the debris field to counter the tomb blades. Their presence confused the already delusional Zondrek, who perceived them as an entirely new faction entering the conflict. While this distraction unfolded, Trazyn's primary collection vessel maneuvered to the largest intact fragment of the world engine, a section of the central command core approximately 3 kilometers in diameter. Using technology similar to that employed in his dimensional pockets, Trazyn extracted the entire fragment intact, transferring it directly to a specialized storage dimension where it could be examined without risk of further damage. With his primary objective secured, Trazyn withdrew his forces from the debris field, leaving Zondrek to claim a hollow victory over the remaining fragments. The Nephrek dynasty would later construct a memorial shrine from these structural components, while the truly valuable technological elements rested safely in Trazyn's collection. The technological treasures recovered from the world engine proved even more significant than Trazyn had initially anticipated. The central command core contained intact memory crystals documenting the superweapon's complete operational history, including its original construction during the war in Heaven. These crystals revealed that the world engine had been designed by a cryptech named Nihilak, whose innovative approach to phase technology had revolutionized Necron military capabilities during the final campaigns against the Old Ones. Of particular interest was the discovery that the world engine had originally been designed not as a weapon, but as a mobile research facility. Its planet-destroying capabilities had been added later, after the rebellion against the Khatan, when the Necrons needed weapons capable of destroying strongholds of their former masters. This revelation provided new context for understanding the technological evolution of Necron's superweapons and their original intended purposes. The phase generators recovered from the debris field represented perhaps the most valuable acquisition. Unlike standard Necron phase technology, which created localized fields affecting individual warriors or small areas, the world engine's generators operated on a planetary scale, creating a seamless barrier that could withstand sustained bombardment from an entire Space Marine chapter. The principles underlying this technology had applications far beyond defensive systems, potentially allowing for the phase shifting of entire structures between dimensional states. Trazyn immediately recognized the historical significance of these generators and established a specialized research facility within Solemnace to study them. Unlike most collectors who merely display their acquisitions, Trazyn maintained a staff of cryptechs dedicated to analyzing and understanding the artifacts in his collection. These specialists, chosen for their technical expertise and lack of dynastic ambition, worked to reverse engineer the world engine systems while maintaining careful records of their findings. The political fallout from Trazyn's acquisition reverberated through Necron power structures across the galaxy. The Nephrec dynasty, already weakened by the loss of their greatest weapon, found their standing among other dynasties further diminished when word spread that they had failed to secure even the technological legacy of the world engine. Overlord Zondrek faced challenges to his authority from within his own court, with several lords questioning his competence, given his increasingly erratic behavior and failure to anticipate Trazyn's intervention. More concerning for Trazyn were the reactions from more powerful dynasties. The Sodek, led by Imodic the Stormlord, had long viewed the world engine with covetous eyes, seeing it as a potential addition to their expanding military capabilities. Learning that critical components of this technology now resided in Trazyn's collection, Imodic dispatched a formal delegation to Solemnace demanding access to the artifacts for dynastic security purposes. Trazyn's response was characteristically diplomatic yet unyielding. He welcomed the Sodek representatives with elaborate ceremony, providing them a guided tour of his public galleries, including a newly established exhibition documenting the world engine's destruction, complete with preserved specimens of Astral Knight's space marines frozen at the moment of their final assault. Conspicuously absent from this tour was any mention of the command core or phase generators, which remained secured in Solemnace's restricted vaults. When the Sodek delegation directly inquired about these components, Trazyn expressed surprise that such technology would be of interest to a dynasty as sophisticated as the Sodek, suggesting that surely their own research had progressed far beyond such historical curiosities. This calculated insult to Sodek pride, implying they needed to rely on salvaged technology rather than their own innovations, placed the delegation in an impossible position. They could neither admit interest in obsolete systems nor accuse Trazyn of lying about the nature of his acquisitions without losing face. The delegation departed with formal expressions of gratitude for Trazyn's hospitality and no access whatsoever to the world engine technology. Imodic's subsequent message to Trazyn was brief but ominous, noting that the Stormlord would remember this exchange when next considering the boundaries of Solemnace's autonomy. Trazyn added this message to his collection of notable threats, a gallery containing thousands of similar warnings accumulated over millennia. Beyond the major dynasties, numerous lesser Necron lords attempted to negotiate, threaten, or bargain for access to the world engine technology. The Nihilak dynasty, claiming distant kinship with the cryptech who had designed the original superweapon, asserted hereditary rights to the technical specifications. The Orisgar dynasty offered a trade of rare temporal manipulation devices in exchange for just the phase generator schematics. The Navak, less subtle in their approach, simply dispatched a raiding party that never returned from the outer defenses of Solemnace. Trazyn documented each of these approaches with academic detachment, adding them to his comprehensive record of interdynastic politics following major technological discoveries. From his perspective, the political maneuvering was as historically significant as the technology itself, providing insight into how Necron power structures adapted to changing circumstances in the post-Awakening era. The most significant long-term consequence of Trazyn's world engine acquisition was his improved understanding of phase technology. The recovered generators, after careful study by his cryptech researchers, yielded principles that could be applied on smaller scales with greater efficiency. Trazyn incorporated these advances into his personal phase shifter, enhancing its capabilities to allow more precise control over which parts of his form phased out of conventional reality and for how long. This improved phase technology proved crucial during his subsequent infiltration of the Imperial palace on Terra, where he temporarily acquired a genetic sample, allegedly from the Emperor's original laboratories. The enhanced phase shifter allowed him to move through Custod's detection fields that would have triggered alarms with conventional Necron technology, slipping between quantum states with unprecedented precision. Though he was eventually discovered and forced to abandon several backup bodies during his escape, the primary objective was secured using technology directly derived from the World Engine components. Perhaps the most intriguing discovery among the World Engine remains was a partial schematic for a theoretical weapon system never actually implemented in the original superweapon. These plans, found in a damaged memory crystal from the Command Core, outlined a stellar converter capable of altering the fundamental atomic composition of a star, potentially changing its position on the main sequence or triggering specific types of nova events with predictable effect patterns. Trazyn recognized this theoretical technology as a missing link between conventional Necron stellar manipulation and the more exotic capabilities attributed to fully awakened Catan. The schematics suggested that the Necrons had been working to replicate certain Catan abilities through technological means during the final phases of the war in Heaven, achieving partial success before the conflict's conclusion necessitated the Great Sleep. This discovery prompted Trazyn to establish a new research initiative within Solemnace, dedicated to reconstructing the complete theoretical framework of this stellar conversion technology. While he had no intention of building such a device, his interest remained purely academic. The principles involved had significant implications for understanding the technological capabilities available during the war in Heaven and the true extent of Necron's scientific advancement before the Great Sleep. The World Engine components now occupy a specialized vault deep within Solemnace, surrounded by comprehensive historical context documenting both the superweapon's operational history and its eventual destruction. Visitors to this exhibit, primarily other Necron lords granted rare access to Trazyn's inner galleries, are presented with a complete narrative spanning from the original design concepts through to detailed analysis of how the Astral Knights eventually overcame its defenses. The aftermath of the fall of Cadia marked a turning point not only for the Imperium, but for Trazyn's approach to collecting. The Necron Lord had witnessed firsthand how direct intervention could yield specimens of unprecedented value, and his temporary alliance with Belisarius Cawl had demonstrated the potential benefits of collaboration, even with beings he might otherwise consider merely worthy of preservation in stasis fields. This realization would soon lead to one of the most unusual partnerships in recent galactic history. The initial contact between Trazyn and Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl following the Cadian catastrophe came through unconventional channels. Rather than a direct approach, Trazyn dispatched a series of encrypted data packets to various Mechanicus facilities throughout Ultramar, each containing fragmentary information about an ancient device known as the Pharos. These packets, disguised as routine astropathic transmissions, contained subtle markers that only Cawl would recognize, digital signatures derived from their shared work on the Cadian pylons. Cawl, already deeply involved in his Primaris Space Marine project under Robute Guilliman's authority, initially dismissed these communications as potential traps. The Archmagos had encountered enough Xeno's deception during his extraordinarily long life to approach any such overture with extreme caution. However, the final transmission contained specifications for a previously unknown variant of the Blackstone technology they had examined together on Cadia, specifications that aligned perfectly with anomalous readings Cawl had detected from the planet Satha. The Pharos device had once stood upon Satha, a world in Ultramar that had served as the fortress monastery of the Scythes of the Emperor Chapter before its devastation by Hive Fleet Kraken. Though believed destroyed during the Horus Heresy, the remnants of this ancient technology still existed deep beneath the planet's surface. What made the Pharos particularly significant was its original purpose, not as a navigational beacon as the Imperium had used it, but as a device capable of quantum entanglement on a galactic scale. Trazyn's interest in the Pharos stemmed from its connection to the Necron Empire's original technology. His historical records indicated that the device had not been constructed by the Old Ones or Eldari, as Imperial scholars assumed, but was instead a modified version of Necron phase technology, repurposed by other races after the Necrons entered the Great Sleep. If correct, this would represent one of the few examples of Necron technology successfully adapted by younger races, a historical anomaly worth thorough documentation. Call's motivations were more practical. The Archmagos recognized that the Pharaoh's technology might hold the key to improving warp travel and communication in the post-Cicatrix Maledictum galaxy. With the Astronomican's light blocked across half the Imperium, alternative methods of navigation had become essential to Guilliman's Indomitus crusade. Additionally, Call harbored his own private research interests regarding quantum mechanics and dimensional engineering, fields where the Pharaohs might provide significant advances. Their convergence on Satha occurred in the year 112 of the 42nd millennium, during a lull in the broader conflicts of the Indomitus Crusade. Call arrived aboard his personal vessel, the Tsar Quicitor, accompanied by a contingent of Skitarii protectors and his most trusted tech priests. Trazyn's approach was characteristically more subtle. He had already been on Satha for 3 weeks, methodically surveying the ruins and establishing a network of scarab constructs to monitor all activity around the Pharos site. The first meeting between the two collectors occurred in the shadow of Mount Pharos itself. Call had detected the Necron presence shortly after landing, but chose to proceed to the excavation site regardless, correctly assuming that if Trazyn had wanted to attack, he would have done so already. When the Archmagos and his retinue reached the primary entrance to the underground complex, they found Trazyn waiting, casually examining a fragment of Blackstone with his characteristic scholarly demeanor. What followed was not the tense standoff that Call's Skitarii had prepared for, but rather an exchange of technical observations about the Pharos that resembled nothing so much as an academic conference. Trazyn presented his historical data regarding the device's original Necron design, while Call shared his analysis of how the technology had been modified during its time in Imperium hands. Both recognized that neither possessed complete understanding. Trazyn lacked specific knowledge of this variant's construction, while Call had only limited comprehension of the underlying Necron principles. Their mutual fascination with the Pharos quickly established the parameters for cooperation. Trazyn would provide historical context and technical expertise regarding the original Necron technology, while Call would apply his understanding of how the device had interfaced with Imperial systems during its operational period. Neither fully trusted the other, but both recognized the practical benefits of temporary alliance. Trazyn even remarked that their collaboration would itself make an excellent addition to his historical archives, the first willing technical exchange between Necron and Mechanicus in recorded history. The excavation proceeded in phases, with each bringing new revelations about the Pharos. The outer chambers, already partially explored by previous Imperial expeditions, contained control systems that had been extensively modified by human hands during the Horus Heresy era. Deeper levels revealed the original alien architecture, characterized by the same quantum-entangled obsidian material used in Necron pylons. At the lowest level, they discovered the device's core, a crystalline structure that Trazyn immediately identified as a modified tessellating labyrinth, similar to the technology he used in his own collection to create pocket dimensions. The most significant discovery came when they accessed the Pharos' central memory systems. Unlike standard Imperial technology that stored data in conventional formats, the Pharos maintained records through quantum states embedded in its crystalline structure. Trazyn, with his extensive experience in Necron data systems, was able to interpret these patterns in ways impossible for even Call's most sophisticated cogitators. What they found exceeded both their expectations. The Pharos contained star maps dating to before the War in Heaven, showing the galaxy as it existed 60 million years ago. These maps included not only stellar positions, but quantum entanglement pathways between specific points, a network of connections that bypassed conventional space entirely. Trazyn recognized these pathways as an early version of the inertialess drive that later Necron vessels would use, while Call noted similarities to theoretical warp travel without actually entering the immaterium. More startling were the records of other similar devices placed throughout the galaxy. The Pharaohs had not been a singular creation, but part of a vast network, with each node capable of instantaneous communication and potentially transportation between points. Most of these devices had been destroyed during the war in Heaven or fallen dormant during the Great Sleep, but the data suggested that others might still exist in various states of functionality. For Trazyn, this discovery represented a historical treasure of incalculable value. The network predated even his own active memories, originating from the earliest period of Necron technological development. His archives contained references to such a system, but lacked specific technical details that the Pharaohs now provided. He immediately began creating comprehensive copies of the data for transfer to Solemnace, where it would form the centerpiece of a new exhibition on pre-war in Heaven Necron technology. Call's interest focused on the practical applications. The principles underlying the Pharaohs network offered potential solutions to the communication and transportation difficulties plaguing the Imperium in the wake of the Great Rift. While the technology itself was Xenos in origin, and thus technically heretical, Call had long since demonstrated his willingness to adapt alien principles when necessary. He began formulating plans for devices that would utilize similar quantum entanglement properties while appearing outwardly compliant with Mechanicus doctrine. Their collaboration reached its most productive phase when they attempted to partially reactivate the Pharaohs core. Using a combination of Necron power sources provided by Trazyn and adaptive interface technology developed by Call, they established sufficient energy flow to access the device's deeper functions. This controlled activation revealed that the Pharaohs had maintained passive monitoring of quantum fluctuations throughout its dormant period, accumulating data about disturbances in the fabric of reality across the galaxy. Of particular interest was the device's record of the moment when the Great Rift formed. The Pharaohs had detected not only the immense warp disturbance, but also corresponding fluctuations in the material universe, suggesting that the Cicatrix Maledictum existed as both a warp phenomenon and a subtle but measurable alteration to real space itself. This discovery aligned with Trazyn's historical records of similar events during the War in Heaven, when the boundaries between dimensions had been similarly stressed. The most controversial moment in their collaboration came when Trazyn proposed using the Pharaohs to establish a direct connection to a similar device he claimed existed in a sealed vault on Solemnace. Such a connection would allow instantaneous transfer of data and potentially physical matter between the two locations, effectively creating a stable webway-like passage outside both normal space and the warp. Call recognized the enormous strategic value of such a connection, but also the implicit risk of providing a direct pathway into Ultramar for Necron forces. After extensive internal calculation, Call agreed to a limited implementation, a quantum-entangled data link that would allow information exchange but not physical transportation. This compromise satisfied Trazyn's immediate desire to transfer the Pharaohs data to his archives while maintaining Call's security protocols. The link operated for precisely 7 hours, during which an unprecedented volume of technical and historical information flowed in both directions. What Call did not fully appreciate was that Trazyn had embedded specialized scarab constructs within the data stream itself, microscopic devices that reassembled on the Solemnace side to create physical copies of key Pharaohs components. Similarly, Trazyn remained unaware that Call had installed monitoring algorithms in the transferred data, designed to map portions of Solemnace's internal network architecture. Both collectors, true to their nature, had found ways to acquire more than their agreement strictly permitted. The implications of their discoveries extended far beyond the immediate technical exchange. The Pharaohs records confirmed Trazyn's long-held theory that the Necrons had achieved levels of technological sophistication during their early empire that exceeded even their current capabilities. The loss of this knowledge, partly due to the Khatan's influence and partly through degradation during the Great Sleep, represented one of the most significant setbacks to Necron civilization. For a collector obsessed with preserving history, this validation of his approach was profoundly satisfying. For Call, the collaboration provided insights into Necron methodologies that would influence his work for centuries to come. The quantum principles underlying the Pharos would later be incorporated into his designs for improved communication systems for the Primaris Space Marines, allowing for more reliable coordination across the divided Imperium. More subtly, his exposure to Trazyn's historical perspective gave him a longer view of technological development, reinforcing his willingness to explore unconventional approaches to technical problems. Their joint exploration of the Pharos came to an abrupt end with the arrival of an Ultramarines fleet in the Satha system. Guilliman, having been informed of unusual activity around the former sides of the Emperor homeworld, had dispatched a force to investigate. Trazyn, ever cautious about encountering Primarchs, withdrew his visible presence while maintaining hidden monitoring systems throughout the complex. Call, meanwhile, presented the Ultramarines with a carefully edited version of his activities, describing a purely mechanicus exploration of ancient technology with no mention of Necron involvement. The legacy of their collaboration would continue long after both had departed Satha. Trazyn incorporated the Pharos data into a new wing of Solemnace dedicated to pre-dynastic Necron technology, creating detailed interactive displays showing how the original network had functioned. Visitors to this gallery would observe not only the technical specifications, but also Trazyn's meticulous recreation of his work with Call, presented as a historical curiosity, a rare example of cross-species technological cooperation. Call's use of the knowledge was more circumspect, but no less significant. The principles derived from the Pharos influenced his development of improved navigation systems for vessels traversing the darker regions of the Imperium, where the Astronomicon could not be perceived. More controversially, he established a secret research facility in the Vespertine system, dedicated to exploring quantum entanglement technologies based on the Necron principles, carefully disguised as a standard Mechanicus observatory. The relationship between Trazyn and Oricon transcended mere rivalry, evolving into something approaching cosmic comedy, a multi-millennial game of one-upmanship that would ultimately center on the ancient world of Serenade and the mysterious tomb of Nephrith. Their conflict over this particular site began innocuously enough, with Trazyn's discovery of fragmentary references to Nephrith in pre-biotransference texts recovered from a minor tomb world. These texts described Nephrith as a master cryptech whose technological innovations had been deliberately obscured from historical records for reasons unknown. For a collector of Trazyn's sensibilities, such historical censorship represented an irresistible challenge. His initial investigations led him to Serenade, a world that had once been a Necronter outpost before biotransference. The planet had since developed its own indigenous human population, descendants of colonists who had arrived during the Dark Age of technology. These humans had built their civilization atop the ruins of the Necronter settlements, entirely unaware of what lay beneath their modest cities. Trazyn's preliminary surveys of Serenade revealed unusual energy signatures emanating from the planet's southern hemisphere, suggesting the presence of still active Necron technology. Further scans indicated a tomb complex of modest size but extraordinary sophistication, employing dimensional folding techniques that allowed it to occupy more space than should have been physically possible within its apparent boundaries. Most intriguing was the evidence of active security protocols far more advanced than those typically found in standard tomb complexes. What Trazyn did not initially realize was that Oricon had been monitoring Serenade for centuries. The astromancer's interest stemmed from his chronospatial calculations, which indicated that Serenade would become the focal point of a significant temporal convergence in the 41st millennium. Oricon had established a hidden observation post in the planet's asteroid belt, from which he had been patiently tracking the slow awakening processes of the tomb systems below the human settlements. Their mutual discovery of each other's interest in Serenade occurred when Trazyn attempted to establish a beachhead on the planet's surface. As his initial forces materialized near the suspected tomb entrance, they encountered not human defenders, but a contingent of Necron immortals bearing Orikan's distinctive chronometric markings. The ensuing skirmish ended inconclusively, with both sides withdrawing to reassess the situation after confirming each other's presence. Rather than immediate confrontation, both Necron lords opted for a more subtle approach. Trazyn deployed specialized scarab constructs designed to infiltrate the human settlements and gather information about any artifacts or locations of particular reverence that might indicate awareness, however subconscious, of the Necron presence beneath their feet. Orikan, meanwhile, focused on accessing the tomb's outer security systems, attempting to decipher the unique encryption protocols that protected its inner chambers. The tomb itself proved far more complex than either had anticipated. Initial penetration revealed a structure that appeared to reconfigure itself in response to intrusion, with corridors shifting and chambers relocating according to patterns that defied conventional spatial logic. This dynamic architecture represented technology far beyond standard Necron tomb design, suggesting that Nephrith had indeed been an innovator of extraordinary skill. The breakthrough came when Trazyn's scarabs discovered a peculiar religious cult among Serenade's human population. This small group worshipped what they called the Shifting Labyrinth, a mythical underworld that periodically claimed the lives of those who ventured too deeply into certain ancient ruins. Their religious texts contained surprisingly accurate descriptions of Necron architectural elements, indicating that over the millennia, some humans had encountered the outer chambers of Nephrith's tomb and survived to document their experiences. Trazyn immediately recognized the value of these human cultists as potential guides. Through careful manipulation, he established contact with their leadership, presenting himself as an emissary of their underworld deities. The humans, confronted with a living manifestation of the entities they had worshipped for generations, proved eager to assist, providing information about entrances to the ancient structures that had not appeared in Trazyn's initial surveys. Orikan, observing these developments from his hidden vantage point, recognized Trazyn's strategy and moved to counter it. Using his mastery of temporal manipulation, he projected himself into the dreams of the cult's prophet, presenting visions of catastrophe should they align with the false deity who had approached them. This intervention split the cult into factions, with some remaining loyal to Trazyn while others now viewed him as a usurper to be opposed. The resulting confusion among the human population created the perfect cover for both Necron lords to accelerate their exploration of the tomb complex. Trazyn, guided by his loyal cultists, discovered an entrance through an ancient well that led directly to a stable section of the Shifting Labyrinth. Orikan, using information extracted from the dreams of his followers, identified a weakness in the tomb's chronometric defenses that allowed him to bypass several layers of security. Their parallel exploration paths converged at the first significant discovery within the tomb, the prismatic galleries. This vast chamber, extending seemingly infinitely in all directions, contained crystalline structures that captured and preserved light patterns from different eras of Serenade's history. Each crystal, when approached, would project holographic scenes showing the planet during different periods, from its initial colonization by the Necronter to the arrival of humans and beyond. For Trazyn, the prismatic galleries represented a historical treasure of incalculable value. Each crystal contained perfect observational data from time periods that even his comprehensive collection lacked. The preservation method was unlike anything in his experience, using principles that somehow captured not just visual information, but the actual light waves themselves from distant time periods, stored in a state of quantum suspension. Orikan's interest was more technical. The chronometric principles underlying the galleries aligned with his own research into temporal manipulation, but employed methodologies he had never considered. The crystals demonstrated a way to observe the past without actually traveling through time, a technique that could potentially enhance his predictive capabilities if properly understood and replicated. Their mutual fascination with the prismatic galleries led to the first direct confrontation within the tomb. Both arrived simultaneously at the central control dais, a raised platform of living metal that appeared to regulate the crystalline displays. As each attempted to claim control, the system responded to their conflicting commands by initiating a security protocol that sealed the chamber and began a systematic shutdown of the preservation fields maintaining the crystals. Recognizing the imminent loss of invaluable historical data, Trazyn proposed an unprecedented temporary alliance. He would focus on maintaining the stasis fields, preserving the crystals, while Orokin, with his superior understanding of temporal mechanics, would work to override the security systems. Their combined expertise succeeded in stabilizing the galleries, though not before several of the oldest crystals had degraded beyond recovery. This brief cooperation gave both access to the information contained within the galleries, including crucial data about the deeper sections of the tomb. The holographic records revealed that Nephrith had created the complex as a testing ground for experimental technologies related to dimensional engineering and temporal manipulation, fields that interested both Trazyn and Orokin for different reasons. Most significantly, the galleries contained information about Nephrith's masterwork, a device called the Celestial Aperture, capable of opening controlled gateways to specific points in space-time. This technology represented a significant advancement over standard Necron teleportation, or even the dolmen gates used to access the webway. If functional, it would allow precise transportation to any location in the galaxy at any point in its history, a capability with obvious appeal to both a collector of historical artifacts and a master of chronospatial prediction. The location of the Celestial Aperture was revealed to be in the tomb's innermost chamber, protected by multiple layers of security that adapted based on the identity of the intruder. The gallery's records showed that Nephrith had designed these systems specifically to identify and counter the approaches of different Necron dynasties, with particular emphasis on Nihilak and Sawdek methodologies, suggesting he had anticipated eventual intrusion attempts. With this knowledge, both Trazyn and Orokin abandoned any pretense of cooperation and raced to reach the aperture first. Their competition took them through increasingly hazardous sections of the tomb, where Nephrith's experimental technologies created unpredictable environmental effects. In one chamber, gravity fluctuated randomly between crushing intensity and near zero. In another, matter itself became unstable, temporarily converting solid objects into energy states and back again. Trazyn navigated these hazards with the adaptability that had made him such a successful collector, deploying specimens from his collection to test dangerous passages before committing himself. Particularly useful was a preserved H-Rud chronivore, which he temporarily activated to absorb temporal distortions in chambers where time flowed inconsistently. Orokin, meanwhile, relied on his mastery of chronometric technology, using his staff to create localized fields of temporal stability around himself as he advanced. Their paths diverged and reconverged multiple times as the shifting architecture of the tomb responded to their presence. On several occasions, they found themselves temporarily trapped together in chambers that sealed unexpectedly, forcing brief, tense alliances to escape before resuming their competition. During these enforced collaborations, each attempted to extract information from the other about what they had discovered in sections of the tomb the other had not yet explored. The human population of Serenade, meanwhile, had become increasingly aware of the ancient powers stirring beneath their cities. The cult factions loyal to Trazyn and Orokin grew in size as inexplicable phenomena manifested on the surface, chronometric distortions that caused localized time acceleration or reversal, and dimensional instabilities that temporarily rendered buildings partially transparent or shifted them meters from their original locations. These effects were byproducts of the tomb's increasing activity as more of its systems awakened in response to the Necron intrusion. Neither Trazyn nor Orokin had anticipated the extent to which their exploration would affect the surface, as Nephrith's technologies proved far more interconnected with the planet itself than standard tomb complexes. The shifting labyrinth extended conceptually throughout Serenade's crust, with tendrils of influence reaching even into the atmosphere. The final approach to the Celestial Aperture required passage through what the tomb systems identified as the Chronometric Vault, a massive chamber where time itself had been weaponized. Here, defensive systems detected intruders and subjected them to targeted temporal effects, rapidly aging metal components, or reversing the sequential order of movement to make coordinated action impossible. Both Necron Lords suffered significant damage traversing this space, with Trazyn losing several backup bodies and Orokin repeatedly forced to reset his personal timeline to avoid fatal paradoxes. Their arrival at the Aperture Chamber occurred almost simultaneously, Trazyn emerging from a dimensional fold he had identified through careful mapping of the tomb's reconfiguration patterns, and Orokin materializing via a precisely calculated temporal jump that bypassed the final security gate. What they found exceeded even their considerable expectations. The celestial aperture occupied the center of a vast spherical chamber, its mechanisms extending outward in concentric rings of increasingly complex technology. The device itself resembled a metallic iris surrounded by rotating bands of living metal, inscribed with mathematical formulas of staggering complexity. Above the aperture hovered a miniature representation of the galaxy, each star a tiny point of light that could be selected as a destination. Most remarkably, the aperture was still functional after millions of years of dormancy. As Trazyn and Orokin approached, its systems activated automatically, the iris dilating slightly as targeting mechanisms aligned with the galactic display. Nephrith had apparently designed the device to maintain itself in a state of readiness indefinitely, powered by a localized pocket dimension containing a captive energy source of unknown type. The control systems presented a new challenge, as they were configured to respond to Nephrith's unique command protocols. Both Necron Lords immediately began attempts to override these systems, each employing different approaches. Trazyn applied knowledge gained from similar devices in his collection, looking for common elements in the command architecture that might allow him to substitute his own authentication. Orokin took a more direct approach, attempting to calculate the exact sequence of temporal coordinates that would convince the system he was Nephrith arriving from a different time period. Their competing efforts created interference patterns in the aperture's activation sequence, causing it to cycle through potential destinations randomly. The galactic display above them spun with increasing speed as the targeting system attempted to resolve the conflicting commands. Energy began to build within the iris, creating a visible distortion in space-time that expanded outward in pulses of chronometric radiation. On the planet's surface, these pulses manifested as waves of temporal distortion that swept across the human settlements. Buildings aged centuries in moments before reverting to their original state. People experienced subjective time shifts that left them temporarily out of phase with their surroundings. The cult factions interpreted these phenomena as the beginning of a prophesied ascension, gathering at locations where the effects were strongest to await transformation. Within the Aperture Chamber, Trazyn and Orokin realized the danger too late. Their interference had created a cascade effect in the device's targeting systems, causing it to attempt simultaneous connections to multiple points in space-time. The structural integrity of reality around Serenade began to weaken as the aperture drew increasing power from its dimensional energy source to maintain these connections. The first breach occurred without warning. A section of the chamber wall simply ceased to exist, replaced by a view of Serenade as it had been millions of years earlier, during its initial colonization by the Necronter. Through this opening walked a figure both Necron Lords recognized immediately from historical records. Nephrith himself, still in his original Necronter form, apparently drawn through time by the malfunctioning aperture. This apparition, whether the actual Nephrith displaced through time or some kind of recorded projection, surveyed the chamber with evident disappointment. In flawless Necronter language, he addressed both intruders, explaining that the aperture had been designed with a failsafe against precisely the kind of interference they had created. The device would now execute its emergency protocol, a controlled implosion that would seal all temporal breaches by removing Serenade itself from the normal flow of time. As the era Indomitus unfolds across a galaxy split by the Great Rift, Trazyn the Infinite observes these developments with the detached interest of an archivist witnessing yet another tumultuous chapter in the cosmos's long history. From the secure galleries of Solemnace, he monitors the movements of armies, the rise and fall of empires, and the emergence of new threats with the practiced eye of one who has seen it all before. Yet even for a being who has witnessed 60 million years of galactic history, the current era presents unique opportunities and challenges. The return of Roboute Guilliman and the subsequent Indomitus Crusade have particularly captured Trazyn's attention. The Primarch's reawakening represents a historical anomaly, the return of a figure from the Imperium's mythic past to directly influence its present. Trazyn's extensive archives contain detailed records of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy eras, including specimens from various Space Marine legions preserved at different stages of their development. The opportunity to compare these historical examples with Guilliman's contemporary efforts to reshape the Imperium provides an unparalleled opportunity for comparative analysis. Trazyn's data-gathering network, consisting of disguised scarab constructs and compromised Imperial communication systems, has been redirected to track the Primarch's movements across the galaxy. Of particular interest are Guilliman's interactions with the Adeptus Mechanicus and the development of the Primaris Space Marines. Having already acquired several early Primaris specimens during the fall of Cadia, Trazyn has noted significant tactical and physiological differences between these enhanced warriors and their traditional counterparts. His analytical engines have identified 17 distinct combat doctrine modifications that appear to incorporate historical Legion tactics previously abandoned after the Second Founding. More significant than these tactical observations is Trazyn's growing interest in the Primarchs as collection subjects. His galleries already contain what he claims is a perfect clone of Fulgrim, preserved in stasis before its awakening. This specimen, acquired from Fabius Bile's laboratories, represents merely the beginning of what Trazyn envisions as a comprehensive Primarch exhibition. Intelligence reports gathered by his infiltration constructs suggest that several lost Primarchs may have been located by various factions in the aftermath of the Great Rift's formation, creating potential acquisition opportunities. Trazyn's interest extends beyond mere preservation. His historical records contain fragmentary information about the Emperor's original creation process for these transhuman generals. By studying multiple Primarch specimens, he believes he could reconstruct the complete technological and genetic framework that produced these remarkable beings, adding not just the individuals, but the science of their creation to his historical archives. This knowledge would fill a significant gap in his documentation of humanity's technological evolution. The Necron Collector has already made several unsuccessful attempts to acquire additional Primarch specimens. During the Terran Crusade, his agents tracked Guilliman's progress through the webway, waiting for an opportunity to isolate the Primarch from his custodian guards. The attempt was thwarted when the Thousand Suns intercepted the Imperial forces, inadvertently disrupting Trazyn's carefully positioned stasis traps. Similarly, rumors of Lion El'Jonson's awakening prompted Trazyn to dispatch collection vessels to the Rock, though these were driven off by Dark Angel's defense systems before they could confirm the Primarch's status. Most ambitious was Trazyn's infiltration of an Ultramar medical facility, where Guilliman underwent treatment following injuries sustained fighting Mortarion. Disguised as an attending tech priest, Trazyn nearly succeeded in extracting genetic samples before being discovered by a vigilant Sister of Silence, whose null abilities disrupted his holographic disguise. The ensuing confrontation resulted in the loss of 3 backup bodies before Trazyn was forced to retreat, though not before securing a fragment of damaged armor containing trace genetic material, a minor victory, but far less than his intended acquisition. These Primarch collection efforts represent more than simple trophy hunting. Trazyn recognizes these transhuman beings as the linchpins of humanity's current historical trajectory. By studying their physiology, psychology, and tactical methodologies, he gains insight into the Imperium's potential futures. His historical archives suggest that transhuman leadership has been a recurring pattern in human civilization, dating back to the Dark Age of technology when similar, if less sophisticated, genetic engineering created warrior elites to lead human expansion. Beyond his interest in Primarchs, Trazyn has taken careful note of the increasing Necron awakening across the galaxy. The return of Zarek, the Silent King, represents a fundamental shift in Necron politics that even Trazyn cannot ignore. As nominal overlord of all Necron dynasties, Zarek's reappearance after millions of years of self-imposed exile has forced every Necron lord to reconsider their position in the dynastic hierarchy, Trazyn included. Trazyn's relationship with Zarek is complicated by historical factors. His archives contain extensive documentation of the Silent King's role in both the biotransference process that transformed the Necronter into Necrons and the subsequent rebellion against the Khatan. These records include perspectives and details that Zarek might prefer remain forgotten, particularly regarding promises made to the Necronter people before their transformation and decisions made during the final phases of the war in Heaven. Initial contact between Trazyn and the returned Silent King occurred through diplomatic proxies. Zarek dispatched Triarch Praetorians to Solemnace, ostensibly to invite Trazyn to attend the Silent King's court and renew his oath of fealty. Trazyn responded with characteristic subtlety, welcoming the Praetorians as honored guests and providing them a comprehensive tour of his museum's public galleries, particularly those documenting Zarek's historical achievements. The implied message was clear. Trazyn possessed historical leverage that could either legitimize or undermine the Silent King's authority. The Praetorians returned to Zarek with Trazyn's formal response, a pledge of respect for the ancient office of Silent King, coupled with a diplomatic request for continued curatorial autonomy for Solemnace. This carefully worded statement neither accepted nor rejected Zarek's authority outright, instead establishing a position of negotiated independence. Accompanying this message was a gift, a small stasis casket containing what Trazyn claimed was the last surviving fragment of the original Declaration of Empire that had established Zarek's authority before biotransference. Zarek's response demonstrated his own political acumen. Rather than demanding immediate compliance or threatening force, he formally recognized Solemnace as a cultural protectorate of the Triarch, effectively acknowledging Trazyn's independence while simultaneously placing his activities under nominal Triarch oversight. This arrangement allowed both parties to maintain their positions without direct confrontation, though tensions remain beneath the diplomatic surface. The practical implications of this arrangement have manifested in subtle ways. Trazyn has provided Zarek with selected historical records that support the Silent King's efforts to unify the scattered Necron dynasties, particularly documentation of external threats that necessitate cooperation. In return, Zarek has granted Trazyn limited access to his fleet's navigational data, revealing the locations of several long-lost tomb worlds that had not been included in any dynastic registry. This exchange benefits both parties while revealing their underlying motivations. Trazyn gains access to previously unknown collection sites, while Zarek receives historical validation useful for his unification efforts. Neither fully trusts the other, but both recognize the practical advantages of limited cooperation in the current galactic environment. Zarek's primary objective, mobilizing the Necron dynasties against the Tyranid threat, aligns with Trazyn's interests in an unexpected way. The Collector has observed with alarm how Tyranid consumption of worlds often results in the complete obliteration of historical sites and artifacts. Unlike wars between conventional armies, which typically leave ruins and relics for later collection, Tyranid biophagic processes leave nothing but barren rock. For a being dedicated to preserving galactic history, this represents an existential threat to his life's work. Trazyn's response to this threat has been characteristically multifaceted. His collection vessels now shadow Tyranid splinter fleets, racing ahead of their advance to secure valuable specimens and artifacts before consumption. He has established specialized containment protocols for Tyranid specimens, recognizing their unique biological properties and hive mind connections. Most significantly, he has begun experimenting with repurposed Necron pylons similar to those on Cadia, testing whether their reality-stabilizing properties might disrupt the synaptic connections that bind Tyranid organisms to their hive mind. These anti-Tyranid efforts represent one of the few areas where Trazyn's interests align neatly with broader Necron strategic objectives. Zarek has taken note of this alignment, occasionally providing intelligence about Tyranid fleet movements that might threaten sites of particular historical significance. This limited cooperation has not extended to joint military operations, but the potential for such collaboration exists should circumstances warrant. Beyond Tyranids, Trazyn has demonstrated increasing interest in the changing nature of chaos following the Great Rift's formation. His historical archives contain extensive documentation of previous Black Crusades and major warp incursions, allowing him to identify unprecedented patterns in current chaos activity. Of particular concern are reports of entire planets being shifted into the warp, removing them completely from real space and thus from his potential collection activities. To counter this threat, Trazyn has accelerated development of specialized phase technology designed to operate within warp-corrupted environments. Building on principles discovered during his examination of the Cadian pylons, he has created prototype collection devices that can temporarily stabilize small areas within warp storms, allowing for the extraction of specimens even from heavily corrupted worlds. Initial field tests on the fringes of the Great Rift have shown promising results, though with significant equipment loss rates. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Trazyn's current activities involves his living exhibitions, specimens from his collection temporarily reactivated to serve specific purposes. Following the successful deployment of his prismatic array during the fall of Cadia, Trazyn has refined this approach, developing more sophisticated control protocols that allow for longer deployment periods and more complex tactical operations. These living exhibitions now serve as both collection agents and experimental subjects, providing Trazyn with data about how historical warriors perform in contemporary combat situations. Recent deployments have included a squad of salamanders from the Great Crusade era, activated to test their tactical adaptability against Death Guard forces on Purgator 4, and a preserved Eldari autarch released to counter a Genestealer cult uprising that threatened an ancient library on Selvanus 2. In each case, Trazyn observed the operations remotely, documenting the interaction between historical combat doctrines and modern threats before retrieving his specimens and restoring them to stasis. The strategic implications of these deployments extend beyond Trazyn's immediate collection interests. Imperial commanders who have witnessed these living exhibitions report increasing concern about what other historical warriors might reside in Trazyn's galleries, potentially available for deployment at critical moments. The possibility that he possesses specimens from the Horus Heresy or even earlier conflicts raises troubling questions about his potential influence on current military balances. This concern has prompted several attempts by various factions to inventory Trazyn's collection through espionage or direct infiltration. The Ordo Xenos has made 3 documented attempts to penetrate Solemnace's outer defenses, each ending with the disappearance of the infiltration team. The Blood Ravens chapter, recognizing a kindred collecting spirit despite their adversarial relationship, have approached the matter differently, offering to exchange information about relics they have encountered for insight into Trazyn's holdings, an offer he has found amusingly transparent but not entirely without merit. As the era Indomitus progresses, Trazyn's collection continues to grow, incorporating specimens and artifacts from each new conflict. The Psychic Awakening has provided particularly valuable additions, as human psychers reaching unprecedented power levels represent a significant evolutionary development worthy of comprehensive documentation. Similarly, the emergence of pariah nexuses has drawn his attention as potential examples of Catan technology being implemented on a scale not seen since the War in Heaven. Looking to the future, Trazyn has begun preparations for what he terms contingency acquisitions, specialized collection protocols designed to secure key specimens in the event of civilization-ending catastrophes. These preparations include hardened stasis vaults on isolated worlds, automated collection vessels programmed to activate under specific disaster conditions, and dimensional pocket realms where particularly valuable specimens could survive even the destruction of Solemnace itself. These contingency measures reflect Trazyn's ultimate purpose, not merely to collect for his own satisfaction, but to preserve the galaxy's history against the forces of entropy and oblivion. In his mind, each specimen, each artifact, each moment captured in stasis represents a victory against time itself. While other Necron lords seek to rebuild empires or reclaim their lost organic forms, Trazyn's ambition transcends such limited goals. He seeks nothing less than to create a perfect historical record, a comprehensive archive that would survive even the death of the galaxy itself. As new threats emerge and old powers return, Trazyn the Infinite watches from his galleries, selecting which moments deserve preservation and which specimens will best represent their era for the enlightenment of future observers. Whether these observers will be Necrons, humans, or species yet to evolve remains immaterial. What matters is that the history will endure, captured forever in the infinite archives of Solemnace, where time itself stands still at the command of the Master Collector.